Welcome to this episode of Doug Has Questions. Today, my guest is a longtime friend, Mike Mackowiak. Very talented individual in many ways with a really cool life story that I hope you all enjoy listening to. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
It's funny. It's a really cool story, but I mean, it's just the story I know. It's the only one I know.
Most people, when I ask them to come on here, they're like, well, it's just, I don't really have much that I've done or anything, but it's always cool to other people. But when it's the life that we've lived,
because we know all the boring parts in between,
Yeah, it's just you're just like, well, this is what I've done, and you've lived it, so it's not really that exciting. But people on the outside, some of the things you did, it's like, man, I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to do that. That sounds really cool. What was that? And so you never know what part of that is really interesting to somebody else.
Yeah. And we skip over a lot of the mundane.
We can.
Yeah.
Because we can't talk about your whole life story because we only got a couple hours here. We don't have
most of it's mundane, so that's good. That'll be simple.
Yeah. So let's start off with early Mike.
Early Mike.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born on a homestead. Actually, I was born in a ham shack, and I don't know if everyone knows what a ham shack is. My dad was a ham radio operator, KL7DVO in Fairbanks, and we had a homestead, and we had a home birth. I was the second home birth. My sister was the year previously. She also was born in the ham shack, and so I was born on the homestead in 1959.
So explain the ham shack, because when you first said ham shack, I'm thinking you're smoking hams in there.
Yeah.
But then you talk about your dad with a ham radio, and I'm guessing it's something entirely different.
Yeah. So my dad during the war was in the underground, French underground, Polish underground, and one of the things they learned
We're talking World War II.
World War II, yeah. One of the things they learned to do is to make radios with almost nothing, just basic materials to be able to make a radio that you can transmit information on or receive information on. So he had good, primitive electronic skills where he could make a radio to communicate with the outside. And so he continued on with that in his life, a love of that electronic stuff. I don't know, Radio Shack, we have a Radio Shack here in town, but Radio Shack and Heath, was it Heathcraft or Heathkit? Used to be a thing, early America, 50s, 60s. People would buy, when you couldn't afford to buy a TV, you could buy a kit and you could build a TV. So we don't have that anymore. But anyway, so he was really into radios and communication. And so there's a band, several band widths of radio signal bandwidth, I guess is the right word for it, of different wavelengths for individuals like experimental aircraft, amateur radio operators, to experiment with radios and communicate. And you can communicate with people all over the world, multiple different countries and languages and stuff. And so my dad was into that, and we had a ham shack on our homestead, and he would communicate with guys in Australia and Poland and Germany and all over. So
is that just a separate building outside of the cabin, or is it inside the cabin, just a special room that you had set up?
Well, you say cabin. Cabin sounds really luxurious. I'll tell you what we had.
Tell me, describe it in more detail.
Okay, so Alaska was still a territory, and my mom and dad had qualified to become citizens. At that time, if you lived in the States, you had to live in the States for 4 years before you could apply for citizenship. If you moved to a territory like American Samoa or Alaska or Hawaii, I guess Hawaii was a territory at the time, then if you lived there for 2 years, then you could qualify, because they were trying to encourage people to move to these territories. Mm-hmm. And so my mom and dad moved to Alaska. After 2 years, they qualified for taking their citizenship exams, and they passed and became naturalized. And after that, they applied for the federal Homestead program, which they acquired the rights to do a 160-acre agricultural homestead, and that's where I was born, outside of Esther. So there was a cat trail between Esther, Alaska, and Nenana. Otherwise, it was pretty much a riverboat or dog sled, because they had snow machines, but they were pretty newfangled deals. Mm-hmm. But dog sleds or cat trail in the summertime. And we homesteaded on a piece of property that was about 4 miles outside of Esther. My mom and dad were dirt poor. When they got to Fairbanks, I think they had $43 by the time they got there. They had come in from Ellis Island, and with their savings had bought a Studebaker. I think it was a 1949 Studebaker coupe. I can't remember the exact model, but it was on the homestead when I grew up. And it was not a very big car, and there were 6 of them in there. And they drove
6 people
from New York all the way across to Alaska, with all of the worldly possessions. With all their possessions. All their worldly possessions, yeah. Wow. And it was, if you saw this Studebaker, you wouldn't believe that 6 people could fit into the car, let alone have all their stuff piled on the top.
And just the road conditions coming to Alaska at that time,
they had
too.
To be there was it just after the war, so there wasn't 1952, so there wasn't really much of a highway. It was more of a mud trench, and they would get to one of these mud hollows, and then there would be a cat, and they'd have to wait their turn because there was trucks, full-size semis being towed with a cat through the muck, and then cars and stuff. So that's how they made their way, and they ended up in Fairbanks. But then they lived in Fairbanks for a little bit while they became naturalized and became familiar with it. So anyway, we ended up on the homestead. They surveyed the homestead. There was a primitive method, kind of like we do have today in DNR, with home sites and recreational cabin sites that you can go do. And we had a Quonset hut. So a lot of people have probably heard that term, Quonset hut. It's typically a half-round building that's just basically long. It's a semicircle and elongated. But ours was military surplus. It was a tent, and so there were bows. I think there were 3 sections they were curved. 2x6 curved bows, and then they had hinges, and you would open them up and pin them, and it would make this. I'm going to guess that the span across the bottom was maybe 20 feet. It might have been 18 feet, and so that made this giant hoop, and then every 4 feet there was another hoop, and I don't remember. I was too small to remember how long it was, but it was it was this building, this Quonset hut made with these bows in series, and then the covering was canvas, 2 layers of canvas with about 1.5 inches of insulation, and that was what we lived in for a lot. I think I was 6 years old. I lived there for 6 years, so it was cold in the wintertime.
I was going to say that had to be cold in the wintertime.
I remember the day we got an oil stove. We had potbelly. You're familiar with potbelly stoves. Yeah. So we had a potbelly stove, and so I think the building was I'm guessing maybe 30 feet long or something like that. So we had one potbelly stove, and it was a full-size potbelly stove, but nonetheless, I remember every morning, us little kids, we got up last. That was because we were little. I guess we got to, But I remember when you woke up in the morning, everything was frozen. It was about minus 15 in the house in the morning when you woke up in the wintertime, obviously. Yeah. And we would wait. They would, get the fire started. There was a cook stove and this potbelly stove. They get things going and start melting water and stuff so we could eat. I remember the day we had one of those pot burner oil stoves, and we woke up in the morning and nothing was frozen. It was like, it was so wow. It was just wild, So yeah, that's how we. And anyway, so in that Quonset hut was the ham shack. It was just a little room sectioned off, And with the door, he was able to have a door and stuff and close, because you can't have kids yelling and screaming and whining in the background while you're talking to somebody important in
who knows where,
Uzbekistan or something. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So that's
So as you're talking about that, it came up with a whole bunch of questions.
okay.
So your dad during World War II, he was from Poland, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And so he was in the resistance. He was fighting on the Allied side after Poland had been invaded.
Yeah.
How did he meet your mom, who's from Switzerland?
Okay. So he grew up in Ostrova, Poland, which is kind of a little bit north of the middle of Poland. And Poland is a land, and the borders have changed over time, but it's a land that has been fought over. They've been occupied and liberated, I don't know how many times. It's a rich land of natural resources, farmland and agriculture. It's very productive area ground, and the Prussians wanted it, the Russians wanted it, the Germans wanted it. Everybody wanted it, so the borders were always changing, and the Poles have a history of being oppressed and then liberating themselves. And that's what happened in World War II. The Germans invaded Poland. My dad was, I think he was 15 years old. I think they were living in Krakow at that time. My grandfather was a civil engineer who specialized in bridges. And my dad remembers him. It's interesting, like so many places in the world, the populace was talked into gun registration and all of these things. And so here's my own personal life experience about gun registration. It's always sold as a methodology to protect people, but in reality what ends up happening is that anyone who has a firearm now is registered as having a firearm. And my grandfather had a Luger 9mm, a really high quality pistol. And it was registered because I think like 4 or 5 years prior to the invasion of Germany, they'd gone into registered guns. And my dad remembers him. They owned an apartment in a building in Krakow. And he remembers my dad and he being on the back balcony, and my grandfather had taken apart the Luger down to the finest little screws and springs, and he was throwing them. They knew the Germans were coming. He was throwing them in this courtyard in the back as hard as he could. He said, no countryman of mine is going to be shot with my gun. Well, after the Germans invaded, then they came with a list to the door. Jan Mackowiak, you have Luger model da-da-da, serial number da-da-da. Where is it? I took it apart and threw it in the backyard. Come with us. He went to Auschwitz. My dad never saw him again.
Auschwitz, huh?
Yeah.
Have you been?
I haven't. And he did survive Auschwitz after the liberation, but he didn't live too much longer after that. But my dad never saw him again. Yeah. So my dad then went into the underground. His dad had just been taken away by the Germans. And at that time, the Germans and the Russians they both had invaded Poland, and they were, this is before the Germans decided the Russians were not their friends anymore. So my dad at 15 joined underground. And, he had a brother he had two brothers and a sister younger than him. I think the sister was like maybe 12 years. Basha was 12 years younger. She was 15 years younger. She was just a baby at the time. Yeah. And so he joined the Polish underground. The Polish underground was fighting against the Russians and fighting against the Germans. And so he was passing messages and, doing whatever he could. And at one point, he was in a square waiting to meet someone he was supposed to pass a message to. And as he was in the square, he is sitting by the fountain, and he looks and he sees an SS guy coming here through the street, and he sees an SS agent coming here through the street, and another one coming here. and they just kind of walk up to him, and he knew somebody spilled the beans. Anyway, so he went to a concentration camp or POW camp in France, and he was there for quite a while. He was also in his cell or his space. There was a German submariner who had tried to give away their position and was caught betraying the Germans. And I'm trying to remember, there was a French officer in the underground that was there as well. So the three of them were there. He was 13 hours from being executed, and someone in the French underground had been captured and was taken to this POW camp. And apparently whatever information he had was important enough that they bombed the camp. They bombed the camp either to liberate him or kill him so that the information wouldn't get out. And who knows what that information was at the time, but it was important enough to make sure that he either was liberated or he was killed, because they couldn't let the information get out. So my dad escaped, and he ended up working his way to the coast, and then the French underground got him on a fishing boat, and they got him over to Scotland. So then he finished the war in Scotland and England, defending the British Isles. My mom grew up in Wolhusen, Switzerland, and she was a bit of a tomboy. She climbed Mount Pilatus with her dad when women just didn't climb mountains. That was not. I have a picture of her and my grandfather with their big boots with big cleats, smiling on the top of a rock, before they went to climb Pilatus. Anyway, she was tall, very tall. She was 5'11". She was very tall for her age all the way through school. There's a photograph of her in grade school, and she's as tall as the teachers, and all the kids are half her height. Yeah, so she had an interesting life as a result of that. But in Switzerland, they're multilinguistic. There are 4 official languages of Switzerland: is French, Italian, Swiss German, and Romansh. And so if you grow up in Switzerland, I'm assuming still today, you learn all 4 of these languages. So she was very fluent linguistically, and she was great with languages, read a lot. She would get in trouble. In the wintertime, she would go to a convent boarding school. Summertime, they were up in the mountains with the dairy cattle. They pushed the cattle up into the alpine meadows and then hay the fields during the summer to put up hay for the winter, and the cattle are up high in the alpines, and that's what she did in the summertime. In the wintertime, she was at school, and she got into lots of trouble reading forbidden books like the Count of Monte Cristo and others. She'd get caught reading those to all of her classmates and get into trouble. Anyway, she was quite successful with language, reading and writing, and speaking, of course. And so she was encouraged to go into the diplomatic service. And so she ended up in London at the end of the war, and that's where my dad and her met, was in London. So,
and so
that was a long. See, it was a really long.
That's all right. I
it's complicated.
Life is complicated, yeah. But it just. Your dad, coming out of his experience of his dad was in Auschwitz, he was in a POW camp, escaped, gets funneled off the continent to England and the British Isles, and then meets his future wife in London and everything after the war.
Yeah, that's
a remarkable story to that point. And then they decide, hey, let's go to. What did they ever explain their rationale? Did they just they're done with war-torn Europe and they wanted to get to the States? Was that why they came over, or was there a job available?
No, that pretty much is it. But my dad was really good with his hands, and he had a really good mechanical understanding. So during the war,
so he passed that down to his son, didn't he?
I guess so. I never thought about it that way, because he was working on really tiny stuff. he had a knack for fixing watches, you know. So guys would bring him their watches that weren't working, and he would take them apart and get them working, and make a few bucks that way. So after the war, he actually, my oldest sister, Barbara, was born in London. And she's 9 years older than I am, so she would have been born in 51. And because he had a strong interest in watches and clocks and stuff, and I think my grandfather on my mother's side had fallen ill, and they went back to Switzerland, and he applied for watchmaker's school, and was accepted. Which he did go through the entire master watchmaking school, and was the first he was the first foreigner whose language was not native German to pass the. So I've got his diploma at my office at home. So he was the very first non-German speaking applicant who had passed the Meister Uhrmacher degree. So, and they had to, you know, they didn't make an entire clock for the graduation, but they had to draw straws, draw out of a basket an assignment, and that's what they're, whatever it was, you're going to make an escapement, you're going to make a master gear, you're going to do this or that. And so then you would have a block of metal and your tools, and you would make a gear, or you would make an escapement, and that was your graduating project. That was part of the deal. So he was really proud of that, and it did when they did come to America. And Jack London was huge in Europe at the time, and the whole gold rush, Skagway, the Klondike Trail, all of that stuff was bigger than life in Europe, and in Poland as well. Not just Europe, but Poland really had a romantic idealization of Alaska and the Yukon and the gold rush and all that. And so while they were still in Luzern, they started corresponding with a gal, and I wish I remembered her name, in Fairbanks. She was very well known at the time as kind of the welcoming person of Alaska. People would write to her in Fairbanks and ask her questions. And there wasn't we didn't have internet, YouTube, or any of that stuff. They weren't on
Facebook, right? Welcome to Fairbanks
you write a letter,
page.
and you'd be really happy 4 months later if you got a response. But people who were thinking about Alaska are just curious. They would write her a letter, and then she was the kind of the maitre d'. She would respond to all of these letters, kind of like Santa Claus getting letters.
Yeah.
There's a North Pole, Alaska, and there's people who answer all those Santa Claus letters that go there. And that's kind of what she did. She answered all these inquiries from people all over the world asking about what was Alaska like? What do you do in the wintertime? How do you get water if everything's frozen? All these things. So they had corresponded with her and developed a relationship. And so actually both Poland and Switzerland's kind of divided between Protestant and Catholic, but both my mom and dad were steeped in Roman Catholic traditions growing up, and the priest that married them later told them that you really should go someplace away from Switzerland, away from Poland, someplace where you guys are starting your own life, independent of previous, because they wanted to get out of Europe too, but where they would be basically have to rely on each other. And that was a recommendation that he had made for them for the strength of the marriage, and I think it really did make a difference in their lives. So I thought it was good advice.
So do you have just the one older sister? Or do you have other?
So there's six of direct siblings, and then I have a cousin, Werner. So that's another interesting story. My mom, while she was working in the diplomatic service, before she was in London, in Volhusen, Canton Luzern, where she grew up, because she was getting into the diplomatic service, one of the early assignments that she had, or jobs that she had, was to work in the local House of Records or Hall of Records. And, she's filing birth certificates and death certificates and, just basically doing... Switzerland, the Swiss are a matriarchal society. So your lineage and your heritage, your rights, all of those things are traced through your mother, not through your father.
I didn't know that.
Even though you take your father's last name in Switzerland as well. It's not as complicated as Iceland. I have a lot of friends from Iceland, and their last names change with each generation, because your name might be Bjarne Aldofsson. That's your last name, Aldofsson. But your sister's Kara Aldofsdotter. So she has a different last name. So it's Aldofsdotter and Aldofsson. So that makes it. Seems like it would be super confusing to trace lineage that way. So not nearly as much with the matriarchal society, but they did. Your lineage was traced to your mother. Anyway, so as she's doing the books, she sees this young man who's now I think he was 14. He might have been a little bit younger when she discovered him. His name is Werner Seuss, and he is the daughter of her older sister Maria.
Oh, he's the son.
He's the son. Yeah, he's the son of her older sister Maria. She had no idea she had an illegitimate child, and he had spent his life in this orphanage, because at that time illegitimate children were to be shunned, and you were ashamed of having an illegitimate child. And so she had this nephew that she didn't even know existed, who was he might have been 13 years old, but when they left Switzerland, he was 14. And so she adopted him. And he came to the States with us. So there was Werner, and then Barbara, and Richard, my older brother, who's 9. 9, sorry. My older sister's 9 years older, and Richard's 8 years older than I am. And so it was the three of them, and my mother and father, and my grandmother, my mother's side, Graciela, who came, because she had lost her husband. And she sold the chalet, and with those funds helped to move,
pay their transfer,
to pay the transit on the ocean liner to the island in the middle of New York Harbor. Yeah.
And so how did they stay in New York for a little bit before heading off for Fairbanks, or was it pretty much let's buy a car and start driving?
I don't know for sure. I got the impression, and so a lot of my story is based upon what I remember, and what I remember may not be accurate, but it's the best I can do. I got the impression that they left pretty quickly, and they did stop in Chicago. They stopped in Chicago because there's a huge Polish community in Chicago, and oh gosh, they wanted them to stay so bad, but they together decided, no, we need to keep going. They didn't want to move into a Polish community, and I think part of it was that advice from that priest, not to settle too much into one of your heritages or the other, but to make your own life. And so they kept their plan to go to Alaska, and eventually, I don't know how long it took them to transit, but by the time they got there, they had $40-some, not much. It was pretty much all gone. So
you were at the homestead till you were 6?
No. At the homestead, we lived in a tent until I was 6.
Till you're 6.
I lived in a tent until I was 6.
Okay.
Then we got a basement.
Oh,
man, it was great.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how do you do a basement with, I'm assuming, permafrost up there?
No, well, permafrost is what do I say?
Is it a little further north?
No, it is there. There's
Is
permafrost there, but
yeah.
it's geographically unique. So we were on the south-facing slopes of the ridges north of Fairbanks, and on the north side of those, so they're a geological formation of rock, and I think mostly our ridge that we were on was predominantly schist. So on the north side, where there's very little sun, except for summertime, but wintertime, just short hours of sunlight hit the north slope of those hills. You would have permafrost, lenticular permafrost, where ice would have maybe formed in a puddle or a pond or something like that, and then froze, and then the ground never quite thawed, and then soil and stuff piles over the top of it, and so you have this lens of ice that's permanently frozen; it never thaws out. That's one way that permafrost forms. On the south-facing slopes, where you had good sunlight in the summertime, what happened geologically was that the Tanana Valley is the Tanana River is a very silty river, glacial silty river. It's formed by the Nebezna and the Shoshana rivers coming together, and then multiple tributaries, the Tok, etc., as it flows down towards the Yukon. And it's rich with glacial till. And so in the windy seasons, the glacial till would blow up, like you see here in the Chilkat. You get these dust clouds. You look at it, it looks like a fire or something, but it's just that really superfine glacial till, and it drifted against those ridges and formed loess, Loss, which is it's not like clay. It gets really greasy when it's wet, but when it's dry, it is. It's not quite a sandstone, but you can carve it with a shovel. We used to dig holes and then dig tunnels and stuff, and we'd have all these underground things because it was deep, and it also had good drainage. So on the south slopes of those ridges, you're going to see aspen and birch, which are deep root plants. And on the north slopes, you're going to see moss. And sometimes the moss is like 2 feet thick. Really cool when you're a little kid running, just. And then you'd have black spruce. So on the north slopes, you'd have black spruce. So I'm not sure what triggered the question, but we were on the south slopes. Yeah,
so it was easy enough to
drainage.
dig you had good drainage. It was easy enough to dig a basement.
Yeah.
Didn't have any worries about that.
Right. So we dug a basement, built a concrete block basement, and then later on we built a 2-story house on top of that. It was kind of moved in phases. So yeah.
So with the homestead, what were your parents doing for income or for a job? Were they farming on the property? Were they going into town to do job?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like at that time, again, with technology, they weren't sitting at home on the laptop working remotely.
I remember when the power came and the phone came. Yeah. So my mom, she was good with mathematics and had done bookkeeping in London and in Switzerland, and so she studied and ended up getting her accounting degree, and so she was a CPA. My dad had a shop, a jewelry shop, and because of his fine detail skills, he had a jewelry shop, and so they had a jewelry shop, and my mom was doing accounting until we had somebody swindle my dad out of, this was in the early 60s. Yeah, it was the early 60s. About $30,000 worth of jewelry, which was a lot of,
that's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, you could buy a brand new car for $6,000 back then. So it destroyed him. He paid off all their debts, but it just wiped out the business. Mm-hmm. And so he ended up working for the University of Alaska as an instrument technician, building instruments for research. He worked first at the Geophysical Institute, and then he worked at the IAB, Institute of Arctic Biology. And he would build different. They would build different specialized instruments for research. One of the things that he and a Swiss researcher did the university didn't want to fund it, so the Swiss researcher and he together built a chamber for measuring the respiratory rate of mosquitoes. And so, oh yeah, I mean, it's just that's the kind of stuff that he.
What?
So it was a little chamber that you would put a mosquito in, and you could watch the pressure as the mosquito respirated. You could watch the pressure changing.
I didn't know people were interested in the respiration rate of a mosquito.
Well, when you're running from them, you want to know how you want to know what
fast
they
we
can
have
do.
to run.
Right? Yeah, yeah. So that's the kind of stuff he did, and he worked for the university for a long time. So
how long did you stay? Did you stay at the homestead through high school, or
no? So okay, so they moved to the homestead before there was a road. There was just a cat trail. So in the beginning they skied the 4 miles, I guess, downhill to Esther in the mornings, and then had a vehicle there, and then drove off to work, and then skied up in the winter. I mean, in the evenings and through the winter, and then in the summer times they would walk.
So they just leave you at home then with your older siblings?
Yeah, no, with my grandmother.
With you, okay.
Of course, moved
Yep.
there. Yeah.
Yep.
So, and they did that until the Nenana Highway, which is not the Nenana, it's called the Old Road now. The Nenana Highway got put in. I remember that was really cool because you could drive to the house now. Anyway, so then once the highway was in, then we drove back and forth all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was interesting too because my grandmother was Swiss. She could understand English, but she pretended she couldn't. And I remember as a little kid being brought, we'd be off in the back room somewhere in the basement, and my dad would call us out, and we would come out, and we would, what do you want, And he'd say, okay, he would say, ask grandmother, what her favorite food is. She's sitting right there. Just do it. Ask her. So then we would turn around. We'd ask my grandmother in Swiss, because she couldn't speak English. We'd ask her what her favorite food was. And then she would tell us. And then we would tell them, And the guests, they just thought that was wonderful because we were bilingual, but we didn't know we were bilingual.
Uh-huh.
We talked to our grandmother in Swiss or my mom in Swiss, Anyway, so there's always these odd little things like that happening. But yeah, so my grandmother was, Swiss. Mm-hmm. And so she took care of us. And then the older kids, started going to school. I think they were going to school before the road was in, pretty sure. And so they were skiing back and forth with my mom and dad too.
Yeah.
So we were about 14 miles out of town. Esther's about 11 or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah.
So what grade did you make it through in Fairbanks before?
Freshman high school.
Freshman in high school, and then you went where?
Okay, so the pipeline had happened, or had just been completed. I think 74 or somewhere in that ballpark there, and everybody real estate was booming, everything was booming. So my mom and dad had wanted to move to a climate more similar to what they had known in Europe growing up, mm-hmm. and so they had friends in Washington. And they selected a place in Stanwood, Camano Island, Stanwood, Washington. And that was in 74. And so they bought a little 5-acre, farmstead or whatever. I don't know what they call it back then. But it had a barn and a little house and stuff. And that's what we moved to. And I remember we sold the homestead. They did pretty good. On the sale, somebody bought the whole thing. It's been subdivided since I went back. Martha and I went back in 1988, and it was kind of weird going back to your homestead. It was a subdivision. I don't recommend going back home. It wasn't. Anyway, so they bought this place in Stanwood, and my mom recalls us kids when we first, because we were in a homestead surrounded by state land. We had no boundary. Our nearest neighbor in the beginning was like 3 miles away. We would hike over to see our neighbors, Wally and Leo, or Wally and Eddie. I don't remember his older brother's name now, but we would walk over to see them, or we would walk down to Esther and play with our friends down in Esther, 3 miles away. So we had the full run of the wilderness, and then we got to this little 5-acre plot, and my mom said, yeah, she remembered this for days. We would just walk along the fence. This is our home. Yeah, I think we did that to torment them a little bit too, because we were not happy that we moved.
You took us away from our wilderness paradise.
Yeah, it really was it was a real shocker, and we didn't really fit in. It was a Norwegian dairy community, and you were either Norwegian or you were a jock or you were crap, and so I was crap. I was neither one of those, but it was good for my grades because I got straight A's from that point on. I wasn't doing so good in Fairbanks, but when I got there, it was straight A's.
Was that because you didn't have all the other outdoor distractions?
I didn't have any friends or anything for 3 years. Well, actually, I had a couple of friends that I think had pity on me and befriended me, so I did all right then. But we on the homestead we grew up. We were poor. We would get a new Sears and Roebuck was the thing then, and we could go through the Sears and Roebuck catalog and mark the things that we really liked, and we would get one set of clothes every year. Yep. So that was the first day of school. We had one set of clothes, and then we would have the hand-me-downs. So my brother was 8 years older than I am, so the hand-me-downs were not forthcoming right away. I had to grow into them. So I was pretty. I remember us asking for bell bottoms because bell bottoms were in. Everybody wanted bell bottoms. My mom and dad were not going to have anything to do with the hippie movement or the bell bottoms or any of that crap. It took a long time for us to talk them into letting us have bell bottoms, and then I fell out of a tree and gashed my leg, almost hit my femoral artery, and the only thing I could worry about was my bell bottoms. I tore your bell bottoms. I'll never get another
tragedy. The tragedy.
Never again. Yeah, it's crazy stuff like that. Yeah. Seth Cantor, his book, what was the name of his book? The Caribou one. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I know the name. I don't recall the name of the book.
I'm trying to remember the book. He writes about growing up on the North Slope. And one of the things that he says in there that I totally relate to, he's a Caucasian in a totally Yupik environment, and he's picked on a lot at school. And he remembers as a little kid, pushing on his nose all the time, trying to get his nose to be flat so that he would fit in.
Yeah.
I so totally relate to that trying to fit in thing.
When you went down to Stanwood?
Well, down to Stanwood, but even on the homestead, because we didn't have much for clothes. We were the outliers, So anyway,
what was the name of the book?
Ordinary Wolves.
Ordinary Wolves. Yeah, that's right. And then
it's our production assistant and director looks these things up for us.
Yeah, thanks.
It's always good to have a smart person in the room.
That was a good book. I really enjoyed it. I related well to it. Anyway,
my dad tells a similar story about growing up because he was his mom had died when he was young, and his dad pretty much left him and his brothers on their own. And my dad and his youngest brother were both taken in by families in town, and my dad remembers that when they were still at the farm. The disdain that other students, just because he hadn't showered in a week, they didn't have new clothes. Just
milking the goats in the morning.
Yeah, and just everybody that that I don't think he ever lost that feeling of not fitting in just because of the economic circumstances and the family circumstances at home.
It can have a big effect on
I think he worked really, really hard to make sure my sister and I didn't have that same feeling.
That's what we try to do, I think, as parents. We try to fix the problems that we experienced, try to save our children from the hardship. And sometimes that's not good. Sometimes, I think hardship is part of life, and it builds character. And sometimes we can go too far and shelter our kids from struggles and hardships that they really need to work through.
It's a fine line between the
Yeah.
ones you need to protect from and the ones that they need to go through.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I can relate to that.
Uh,
Anyway, so when I graduated from high school, I think we had the last day of school was a half a day. I think it got out like at 11:30. I was on a plane to Alaska at 2:00.
Boom.
Boom! I was
Peace
back.
out.
Yeah.
So when you came back up, where did you go back to Fairbanks?
I went
or
back to Fairbanks.
with the goal of what was the plan?
Coming back,
just
to
going
Alaska,
back to Alaska.
just coming back to where I fit in,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt I fit in. So actually, I had a job with Joe Vogler, who is a historic character in Alaska.
Mhm.
My mom, because she had the accounting business, she had interesting clients. So she had Henry and Eddie Tiffany of the Tiffany's in New York.
Okay.
Their sons had come to Alaska as hippies, and she was doing their books. So and for years afterwards, we would get, for Christmas, we would get this silver platter, or 2 gallons of pure maple syrup. We'd just get this high end stuff
Silver.
all the time,
Yeah.
because we knew Eddie and Henry
Yeah.
Tiffany, and Joe Vogler was another client that my mom had too. And they all had their interesting little corporate names, like Joe's corporate entity was PB&J, which seems like PB&J, peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
You had to have something, so it was peanut butter and jelly. You got to come up with something. Okay, PB&J. Anyway, so he was mining. He was doing lots of other things. He had real estate he was developing and stuff like that. So I went to work for him mining up in the central area, and we were putting together a placer system on Ketchum Creek.
Okay.
And so that's what I did. I worked for him through the summer, and we never actually mined. We were setting it up, and I had been promised 5% of the take, but since we didn't
If you
have
don't
any
mind,
take,
there's no 5%.
yeah. So he said he would make it up to me. He said, "Okay, I'll pay for your flying lessons." But what Joe really had in mind, Joe, and I don't have to get into too much of Joe's history, but he was divorced. He had a couple of kids. He had come up from Texas with his wife, and he loved Alaska. This is such an Alaska story. He loved Alaska, would never want to leave Alaska. His wife hated Alaska, couldn't stand it. And so they divorced, and she took the kids and went south. And so here I was. I had just escaped from my dad and home life and was on my own. And here was Joe, and he was kind of looking towards me like his son. And he wanted me to get a pilot's license and fly for him and in the Woodchopper Creek and stuff like that, which sounded really appealing. But as I got more and more into it, I realized that the relationship that he was after was not the relationship I wanted. So I got mostly through the pilot training, and then he just decided, when he found out I wasn't going to come back and fly for him, he just quit paying for it. So and I was working at JCPenney's putting studs and tires for $4.95.
$4.95.
Studs and tires, yeah. So I just couldn't afford to pay for gas at the time. And gas back then was cheap, but I couldn't afford to. So I should have finished it then, but I didn't. So it's about 3 hours short of getting my pilot's
3 hours short, and you had to. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you make decisions.
You have to make
sometimes.
decisions based on the
Yeah.
reality at the time.
Yeah. So
How long?
Probably could have done it, but at the time I didn't. I think it seemed impossible at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what was after JCPenney?
Oh gosh, what was after JCPenney?
Did you meet Martha in Fairbanks?
Oh no, Martha was much later. College. I had done a lot of welding on the Homestead and welding in high school in Stanwood. The agricultural communities in Washington, the Pacific Northwest. They have a program called Future Farmers, FFA, Future Farmers of America.
Yep.
And so I had gone through all those courses for welding and all that kind of stuff. So I got a job welding. Trying to remember where, but I was doing a little bit of welding. My brother was living in Anchorage. He was the head of the mechanical division of the Alaska Railroad at the time, and he had talked me into coming and working in Anchorage and seeing if I could find some work there. So I did come to Anchorage, and I got a job welding. And then another friend of our family's who had a homestead next to us had gone to Perth, ran a shipyard in Perth, Australia, and then had come back and was in Washington working at Marco Shipyard, which, for people in the maritime industry, that was a pretty big operation, pretty significant shipyard for the king crab boom and all the rest of that. Anyway, he encouraged me to come down and go to college and work in the shipyard. So I went down, applied, got work at the shipyard because I could weld, and started going to college there.
Where were you going to college? What school?
Shoreline Community College.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was doing mechanical engineering, but it wasn't the upper division stuff. It was the lower division mechanical engineering, and started on that program. And then at some point I had to make a decision either to keep working or finish college, and I decided to keep working in the shipyard. So I ended up staying in the shipyards for a while. And then I wanted to go back to Alaska, so I went to Akutan. Went to Akutan in 82 on a processor as an engineer. I actually went there I think they hired me as an assistant engineer. So I worked there, and then eventually ended up for a short period of time being the chief engineer on the floater. It wasn't a motorized vessel; it was a barge, floating barge, because Pappy decided he had to leave. Pappy was a character. He was a great mentor. He had been in World War II. He was on a tanker, I think in the Gulf of Mexico or off the East Coast, a Chevron tanker, and they'd been torpedoed. And he was one of 3 people that survived because the tanker blew up. And he had been down in the engine room. And when they picked him up, they thought he was dead because he was missing an arm and his leg was mangled. And they just pulled him into the lifeboat. And after a period of time, he started coughing, so they realized he was alive. Anyway, they rejuvenated him and they got him back. And I met him after the war. He was old when I met him, but he was a fantastic guy. But he did have a drinking problem, so he would disappear in a Gumby suit, survival suit, and swim his way slowly to Akutan to the bar and stay there until he couldn't walk anymore. And the people would be looking for him, and finally they'd see this guy in this Gumby suit coming swimming back, with 6-pack on his chest, they go get him. Anyway, they finally let him go, and so I was the chief for a little bit. So that's kind of how I got into the engineering end of maritime deal. So yeah, and then I went back and went to school in. So I don't know if you were going to ask me something else, but I can just
keep going. Keep going.
Okay, so that experience there, and I was there for quite a while. But when I came back, I worked at this friend who had talked me into coming down and working at the shipyard. He started his own business. He and I together we bought this little shop up on Aurora, and we were fixing frames on Jeeps and trailer hitches and that kind of stuff. Just basically a welding shop for RV kind of stuff. We were doing that kind of stuff, and I was eating dinner across the street, and there was a waitress there. And I was staying at the shop. That was where I lived, and I was working across the street. Anyway, this waitress took an interest in me, not that she was my age. She was much older, but she took an interest in me and found out what was going on. She invited me to church, and so I started going to church with her, and gave myself to Jesus at that time. It was a process of time, asking questions. Some people have these amazing conversion deals, like they were on Mount Everest and they were going to die. That's not how I came to the Lord. I came to the Lord slowly, with the kindness of Christians that introduced me to Jesus, and that's what brought me to Christ. Anyway, so I was 21 at that time, and
I want to interrupt you there, because it looking at what Aurora is now. That's
so
the juxtaposition of you finding Christ on Aurora Avenue and looking at what the den of sin it is now. Is just it's just interesting that that's really,
well, God works in
mysterious ways.
Yeah.
But I think that's just a neat, in my mind anyhow, it's a neat anecdote that that's where where you found God, is in that place where now everybody looks at it as just a den of sin.
Well, that was because there was a Christian there who took an interest and cared about me. And that's what made all the difference in the world.
Isn't that interesting? Just the difference one person at the right time in our life saying the right thing or taking an interest can
change your entire life.
Change the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it certainly did. It changed my entire life, because up to that time I had been kind of devoting myself to different mentors that came along, people who were who cared about me and took an interest in me, and I would just trust them. I would just do whatever they wanted, and that didn't always work out the way it should. Because humans are frail, and they make
imperfect,
and that was the difference. When I came to Christ, I found someone in whom I could trust, with all of my being, and not worry about being led down a wrong path or being betrayed. And that made all the difference, and it has made all the difference in my life. So he's been my closest companion.
Do you think that because you met Martha after that, correct? Right. Do you think that led you to your relationship?
Absolutely, because shortly, in about a 6-month period after that, I ended up with a church group in Marysville. I had been going to Calvary Temple area in Seattle, mid-Seattle, and I went to a Pentecostal church for a while as well. I'm trying to remember the name of the church. I can take you right to it in Ballard. But I ended up in Marysville and was working for a guy putting in septic systems, running the backhoe and putting in septic systems. And we did, there's another 2 hours conversation just there about all the wild things we did there. But through the course of that, I became aware of a college in Portland. And a lot of people are familiar with Multnomah School of Bible, but just up the hill from Multnomah was a small college called Columbia Christian College. And the church that I was going to was affiliated with them. And so having gone to so many different Christian denominations, I went to the Christian Brethren, I went to the Pentecostal church, I went to some Baptist churches, and I, in the course of all of these different experiences and going to different Bible studies, I had a collage of different theologies from the scriptures, and many of them clashed. They didn't agree. They were mutually incompatible. They couldn't both be right, and so I was a bit frustrated with that. And so I decided, and this was the Churches of Christ is the affiliated denomination with Columbia Christian College, which they have their own issues as well. But they were very much a Bible-based study of the scriptures kind of denomination. And so I was encouraged by that and applied and ended up going to Columbia Christian College. And that's where I met Martha. She had gone the year before and was on, I do a lot with my hands. I should be Italian. She had gone to Columbia the previous year and was, when I started, she was at Heidelberg doing a European exchange program. So she was in Europe at the time. So I met her the second year when we came back. And we had a lot of, I remember her friends, oh, you'll really like Martha. She's coming back next year. You should meet her. They showed me this picture of this drowned rat. It was like Martha. That's really appealing. She was a girl and her hair was just soaking wet. She'd been in the rain. But she was on some outdoor thing, and I thought, well, it's a drowned rat. That's really nice. Anyway, she turned out to be much more than a drowned rat.
I would say so. Yes.
Yeah, but so. I got to meet her when she came back, and
that's interesting though that they were her friends like the year before you met. Like, hey, wait, you need to come back next year because we've got.
Well, I was seriously dating a friend of hers at the time.
Okay.
In fact, we ended up being engaged.
Yeah.
But what happened over time was that Martha and we weren't dating, but we were really good friends. We were both outdoorsy. We were on ski trips together. We climbed Mount Hood together. We were on multiple climbing expeditions. I was teaching rock climbing at the college. We did rock climbing and stuff together. So we did a lot of stuff all the time. We were always running into each other, and eventually we ended up being together. So no regrets whatsoever. So yeah, she's the next best thing that's ever happened to me. So
yeah.
And then the kids, the kids are.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of different things, but I think my family's by far the best thing that's ever happened to me.
I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So Martha and I met, and we ended up getting married in '87. And I was working I was working for His Sound, which was a audio company that did sound systems for churches, but also for big what do you call them, where you have people come together.
Oh, revival or
but not just it was convention centers and stuff. So it was an professional audio company, and I was working for them, and that's what I was doing when I was working at the college too. But anyway, Martha and I got married, and then I realized after we'd been married a few months that at the end of the month, we'd have all our bills paid, and we'd have $50 left over, and I don't know, I just didn't grow up that way. That just did not feel good.
Having $50 left over?
$50 left over every month. We could have $50 left over, but I was not used to that. I was used to making money and putting money away, saving money, and that was just too scary for me. So I had been offered a job in Olympia, Washington with these guys, and I turned it down and ended up going back to steel work because that's where I knew I could make money. So I ended up working in Sandy, Oregon for a company doing steel work, and there's lots of stuff in between, but after a while, I saw an advertisement in Dutch Harbor for McGowan Marine, and they were looking for an underwater welder. Now, I had done commercial diving when I was at the shipyard. I had started diving, and I was doing commercial diving for the shipyards, for Duwamish and Marco, and so the other shipyards. And most of it was just on scuba, just inspecting boats when they went into the dry dock to make sure things were lined up, blocks were set where they're supposed to be, that kind of a deal. Sometimes I was retrieving tools that had fallen in the water or those kinds of deals. Duwamish, they had a boat sink in the dry dock, and I had to look and see whether or not they could raise or lower the dry dock if the ship was going to interfere with it, that kind of stuff. But I had never done any underwater welding. And the guy who taught me how to dive was the friend that had brought me down to go to college and work at Marco. Anyway, so I wrote to Dan McGowan and told him, I said, I can dive and I can weld. I'm a certified welder, but I've never welded underwater. Come on up, we'll teach you. If you can weld good, you can do it. So that's what got Martha and I to Dutch Harbor.
And that was what year?
1987. So we were married in April, and we moved to Dutch Harbor in November. I moved in November. I think she showed up near the end of December.
Yeah.
So that got us to Dutch Harbor. And we were there. That's where we paid off all our school loans, bought a sailboat, had 2 kids. We did a lot of stuff in Dutch Harbor.
So you just started, you went up there as an underwater diver.
Yeah, I went up there.
Where did the refrigeration aspect come in?
Oh.
Where did or do we want to go to sailing the South Pacific first? Where's this timeline going, Mike?
I'll try to talk fast.
No, we got plenty of time. I just want to know where we're at on the timeline here, because there's.
Well, when Martha and I first started seriously thinking about having a relationship besides being friends, we sat down, and because we're trying to be realistic about it. We liked each other, but getting married was kind of scary. I had been in a relationship where I was going to get married, and I had backed out of it. And there wasn't anything wrong with the girl that I was going to get married to. There was, it just, something didn't feel exactly right. She was a wonderful Christian girl. I know her now and her husband. She's a great mother and wife, but something wasn't quite right, and I just didn't know what it was until later. Later on, I figured it out, but at the time, I could not figure out what. I just was hesitant. I just didn't know. And part of it, when you're that age, the whole world is telling you what you should be looking for in a mate. Oh, opposites attract. Opposites don't attract. Do this, don't do that. Just a myriad of advice that's not necessarily even close to being good advice. And I didn't have anyone to really advise me that I knew well. My mom and dad they had not divorced, but we'd had some serious problems growing up in the home. And so I was trying to work my way through it. And so one of the things Martha and I did was we decided, somebody had maybe suggested it, we decided to write down the things that we thought we would like to do with our lives, some things that, and so she wrote her list, I wrote my list, and we put them together, and it was amazing how many of those things lined up, and I'm sure it was a God thing, that he brought us together. I'm totally convinced of that. But some of the things that we wanted to live remote, and we wanted to have a remote cabin. We wanted to go sailing. We wanted to see ocean sailing. We wanted to be on commercial fishing. Just a bunch of different things that we wanted to have kids. Those things. So anyway, one of the things that we had wanted to do was to sail, and that was a common thing that we had. And living remote, it seems like we've lived remote a lot. So when we got to Dutch Harbor, when I got there, the first thing they did was they wanted to see if I could weld or not. And so it's always interesting, So Dan gave me this project. We were working on this boat, the Arctic trawler, and they had an overboard chute where you would throw discards. But it was near the water line, so it had to be a watertight door, and so the box and everything had to be watertight. And so he had, on his drafting table, he'd drawn up the shape of this because he'd gone to the boat and measured it. And he gave me this sheet of paper to build this waterproof, watertight box out of 3/8 plate. And so I laid it out, and it didn't come out right. So I checked the measurements again and the angles, and it didn't come out right. So I thought, I must be doing something wrong. So I carefully, very painstakingly laid it out again. Because I knew this was some kind of test to see whether or not, I could actually work at the job, right? And so I finally went in and I said, Dan, I know this is a test and I'm going to fail it because I can't figure this out. I said, when I lay this out, it does not work out the way your drawing shows it, Oh, give me that. So you can do that. And gets to the drafting table. Oh, that's because the thickness of the line. So his little drawing, when I expanded it out, the thickness of the line was 3/8 of an inch, and one corner was off by 3/8 of an inch. But I knew he was testing me. He wasn't testing me. He just wanted me to build the silly thing, Anyway, so after a little bit, I got, I was a little bit of welding. He could see I could weld, and so I had to teach he would tell me what I had to do differently, but I basically had to teach myself how to weld underwater. He supplied the equipment and the machinery, and I would go out every day and practice welding underwater. And eventually I got to where, at the end, the last project I did with him was he made the front cover of International Maritime magazine with the raising of the Kuroshima. It was what we call a tramper. It's basically a cargo boat that had gone on the beach in Summers Bay near Dutch Harbor, and Crowley and the big companies had come to salvage it, and there it was when all the insurance money was all gone. There it still was on the beach. And so Dan devised a way to get it off the beach and float it again. But I ended up, me and two other welders welded for a month solid, overhead welding, repairing the patches on the bottom of that boat. So, I went from not knowing how to do it to overhead welding, waterproof, watertight welding overhead. So, yeah, it was really good money. And Martha was my tender for a while because you want somebody that you can trust because, we were working with explosives, and guys would run you out of air. So we were using a Kirby Morgan, which it's just a soft wetsuit helmet with a plate and a oral nasal mask that you breathe through, with microphones and earphones, and you have a little flip down shield that you would use for welding. And we do various different mechanical things underwater. We pull propeller shafts, we pull propellers, we pull rudders, shafts, repair holes. So there'd be a leak in the boat. We would repair the leaks, those kinds of things. And or we do inspections. And sometimes your tender was not paying attention and he'd run you out of air, which most of the time isn't a problem. But if you're underneath a really big ship, like a sea-land container ship,
takes a while to get back to the surface.
Well, and you have to know which direction to go.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I learned early on, was to pay attention to the weld seams, because when you only got maybe 20 foot of visibility, and you can just kind of, as you look around you in a circle, you can kind of see light out there, but you don't know whether you're swimming the 300 feet down the stern of the boat, or you're swimming the 40 feet to the side of the boat. When you run out of air, you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so you start swimming the wrong direction, you're not going to make it. Yeah, you end up being dead underneath the boat. So I had guys that would run me out of air. Martha never did. Martha, you want somebody who loves you to be your tender.
Yes.
So, or the other thing, we would blow wheels. So, in the shipyard, they would heat the hub of a propeller. You're in the dry dock, you put the propeller onto the end of the shaft with chain falls and stuff, and you have a big wrench that you're either using a crane or some type of hydraulics to turn the wrench, but you heat the hub to get it to expand, and then you tighten the nut on the back to cinch it onto the taper. And so it's really tight.
So then when it cools, it's a tighter
cools,
fit.
it shrinks.
Yep.
Right, yeah. And then a lot of times they'll have a keeper on the back of the nut. They'll weld the nut to the hub of the propeller to keep it from turning. Or sometimes there's a locking bolts or various. It depends on how complicated. We were working a lot of crabbers at the time, so they're not nearly as complicated as the bigger ships are. But we would take those off. So how do you get this off? First of all, you got a 4-foot wrench that's made out of steel, right? And it weighs like 100 pounds, right? How hard can you paddle, right? So, you had to come up with things like, we called them anti-gravity blocks. We would have styrofoam blocks that we would have taped with duct tape to the wrench, so the wrench was almost neutrally. You have to figure out stuff like this, to make it work. And so you get the wrench on there, and then you use a crane typically from the boat with blocks to get it centered, so you would slide the wrench onto the end of the shaft and get it back onto the nut, and then pull it with the crane, and you slowly break it loose, and then you could spin the nut off. But then you still got to get the propeller off the shaft that has been shrunk fit on there. Yeah. And it just doesn't come off. So Dan was a powder monkey. He had his powder license, and what we'd use detonation cord, which is what they use to set off explosions. Like we've got Hi-X here in town. They'll do explosions to bust up rock along the road and that kind of stuff. So they have detonation cord, which is it's an explosive shock cord. But what we would do is we would wrap that. We'd have a cap, which is a capacitor discharge that would go on the end of the det cord. And that would be with electrical signal that would pop like a primer on a gun, and that would set off that cord, and it would go off almost in milliseconds, but almost instantaneous. So we would wrap this det cord around so here's the propeller shaft, comes in like this, and here's the hub. We would wrap that det cord in here as tight as you could, and then on the end of the det cord you'd have nylon fastened to the end of the det cord, and you just do like a ton of wraps until you had a shaped charge, basically. Okay. Yeah, so you'd make a shaped charge with this nylon tape pulled in there as tight as you could. Now, while you're doing this, you've got 2 electrodes that are set to set off this cap in front of your face, right? Those are supposed to be being tended by the tender, right? But when you go to swim to tell the tender you're ready to blast, and you follow the cords down into the ocean, into like a crab pot with a zinc on it or something like that, you kind of start thinking that maybe this is not necessarily the best kind of profession to be working on. Anyway, there's just too many things like that where...
How does somebody not pay attention to that? You got somebody dealing with explosives.
There's some pretty girl on the dock. They're talking to them, or they're talking about duck hunting, or they're BSing with So yeah, you get that kind of stuff going on. And this was early Dutch harbor. Things have really civilized out now. You've got dive tenders. You've got emergency diver, backup diver. You got dive tenders now. Everything's just strictly by the book. Back then it was wild cowboy.
So if the guy isn't dropping this overboard, the idea behind that is once you swim up and are out of there, they hit the button, it
sends off a discharge.
Sends off the discharge, and with that shaped charge, it blows that propeller
off the taper.
The taper
hits the nut. Bounces on the nut.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it's loose, and then you
pull
it off.
Then it's loose, so you can go and pull it off.
Except one time I did that, and we set it off. And I came back, and it was still on there. Holy crap. Dan, so I said, Dan, it didn't come off. We need to put another. So, okay, here's another 2 feet. So, he calculates the circumference. There's another 2 wraps. We put another 2 wraps on there, stretch it tight, and boom, sent it off. Still didn't come off the taper. Dan, I think we need to go to to 3 wraps. No, we don't want to go to 3 wraps. He's the powder monkey. He knows what he's doing. I'm just guessing. No, we don't want to go to 3 wraps. We don't want to do
3
that.
wraps is not a good idea.
Move the nut out another 4 or 5 turns. What was happening was the hub was bouncing against the nut and,
then
setting again.
setting it back.
Yeah, he was spot on. We just backed the nut off some more, and it bounced and stayed off. So, but we used to cut pilings too, wood pilings. You put det cord around it, and you cut those pilings right off. It's pretty amazing stuff. You get to do all kinds of fun stuff, but
you realize that probably wasn't the safest job.
Even I mean, I was making really stupid money.
I bet you were.
But you know, how
There's-
long do you want to
there-
be around making stupid money? So,
Yeah, you can only keep making stupid money if you're alive.
yeah. I've lost a couple of friends up there, so
Yeah.
diving accidents.
So that got you looking at what kind of things can I do on a ship that are a little safer?
Yeah, actually, I got approached by a guy who was starting a company. He had come from Sandpoint. He was an electrical administrator. He'd come from Sandpoint and was running the powerhouse out there. And Dutch Harbor was like a gold rush at the time. So I don't know how many people are aware of the Stevens-Magnuson Act. I don't know if you're aware of it.
I know a little bit about it.
So prior to the Stevens-Magnuson Act, there was the United States had a 13-mile territorial sea. So once you got 13 miles off the coast, it was international waters. And I remember talking to guys in Kodiak that had grown up in Kodiak, and all the time that they were growing up in Kodiak, I mean, there was like an ocean of lights out there just past 13 miles. And what it was all these foreign factory boats that were out there harvesting the tremendous seafood resource that was out there. America had no clue what was going on in the Bering Sea because we never participated in it. And at some point, you know, people in places of authority, Ted Stevens and can't remember Mr. Magnuson, Senator Magnuson's first name, but anyway, they were informed of what the potential resource was. And so they extended the territorial waters of the United States out to 200 miles. And when that happened, all these factory vessels and foreign fishing vessels got pushed out. And this resource now was available for the U.S. and Alaskans. We had no idea. There was so much harvesting going on, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Russians. There was so much harvesting going on. We had no idea the effect it was having even on salmon, because they were catching anything that they caught. Didn't matter. They would keep it because there was a market for it. They were just basically any living organism. They were scooping it up. And when they got pushed out to 200 miles, the American fisheries started up to harvest those fin fish, and it was a gold rush. There was just this resource that was just mind-boggling, and we didn't really have plants to process the fish. We didn't know how to process the fish. We didn't know really how to catch the fish. So the way it began was what they call a joint venture operation. And so American fishing vessels would catch the fish and deliver it to foreign processing ships that would pay for the catch. And that's how it began. So it's called a JV, joint venture operation. And then at the same time, they were building up shore-based plants to handle the processing. A lot of it was pollock. There's huge, tremendous whitefish protein product in pollock, and feeds a good portion of the planet. Anyway, so that was beginning, and it was mind-boggling how much money and resources were being thrown at it. So this guy from Sandpoint he saw what was happening, and he decided to relocate to Dutch Harbor. Pat Hatch, and Pat Hatch was probably the first employer I've ever worked for that actually really cared about his employees, really took good care of them. And we worked hard for him too, but you know, he was a great guy to work for. I really appreciated him. He approached me. I had met a guy, Jerry Downing, who is now the president of the company I work for. And he had been the chief engineer at Great Land Seafoods, which was just starting up. And Pat had approached him because he wanted to start a marine service company. So he approached Jerry, and then Jerry either knew about me or Pat had heard about me, and so they both came to me and were talking to me, and eventually we agreed on a wage and a salary, and I ended up going to work for Pat because I had Jerry had a lot more refrigeration experience at the time, but I had electrical and welding and some electronics, and so between Pat Hatch, who had been working on these boats in Sandpoint, Jerry and I, we ended up taking away a third of the entire marketplace in Dutch Harbor from like Harris Electric and Lundy in pretty short order. Yeah, but we were clocking just unbelievable hours.
Yeah,
unbelievable hours. So, but yeah, that's how we got into it, and like guys that ask me, how come you know so much about refrigeration? And it's really, I'm not a genius or anything like that. It's just like if you do something, you solve problems every day. Like a guy on a boat, he might have a problem with the refrigeration system once a season or maybe every couple of years, and he's got to figure it out. I'm doing 5 or 6 of them a day. So I'm getting educated continuously on what's wrong, what could go wrong, how to fix it, those kinds of things. So you learn pretty quick.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into the refrigeration. And then, of course, I ended up with, working on factory trawlers and stuff. Doors open and opportunities. The Lord presents you with opportunities, and I took opportunities.
So you're working in Dutch. You're doing all this refrigeration work, doing all this boat maintenance. Mm-hmm. How do you come to Haines? How does Haines enter into the picture on that?
Wayne Short.
Wayne Short?
Mm-hmm.
Who's Wayne Short?
The Chichacos.
The Chichacos.
You ever seen that book?
No.
Oh my gosh, Doug! It's Alaskana through and through.
I need to read that.
Wayne Short, yeah.
Okay.
The Chichacos. So when I was in grade school in Fairbanks, I think it was 5th or 6th grade, somewhere in there, we'd have a hour reading session, and the instructor we'd pick a book. Earlier classes we might have had Inspector Brown or Encyclopedia Brown or something like that. I don't know if you remember any of those. Or and this book was the Chichacos, or maybe I just picked it up in the library and started reading it. But it is the quintessential Southeast Alaska experience about this family that came to Alaska. I think there was 3 boys, came to Alaska, ended up in Murder Cove, South Admiralty Island, on a homestead there, and they were seal hunting and bear hunting and deer hunting and halibut fishing and everything about it. So when I read this book, I thought, wow, that's where I want to be. So years later, the Chichacos drew me to Southeast Alaska. So it was Martha and I, after we had our kids, decided that we wanted to raise them someplace other than Dutch Harbor. Dutch Harbor, there's lots of kids, and there's a great school, lots of resources and stuff, but we wanted our kids to have a little more opportunities, so we decided to go somewhere else. So
did you specifically target Haines, or did you come down and look at other places in Southeast?
Lots of places.
So
we looked at Kodiak, obviously. Well, I don't know, it was obvious to us. Kodiak, Homer, and then we spent a summer going through Southeast, from one end to the other with our backpacks, and this is before the kids, because we already were talking about coming to Southeast. And, we stopped at all these places on the way, and we came to Haines. It was one of those gorgeous summer days. I don't remember what month it was, maybe June. It was just absolutely gorgeous. We stayed here by the park at Housing Land.
Yep.
We rented some bikes, and we rode our bicycles all over, out Letnikoff, Lutak, and then out Letnikoff to the cannery. We thought, wow, what a gorgeous place. Wouldn't it be cool if we could live here someday? And, you know, that's pretty
That's
much
where
where
you
we
live.
live. You
Yep.
know, it's pretty, so those doors opened up too. But then we went to Skagway, and I don't want to rank on Skagway, but we went to Skagway, and there was like 3 or 4 cruise ships in at the time. And we started to go through all the crowds with our backpacks. And, you know, I don't think the ferries left yet. We ran back and got the ferry, spent the rest of the time in Haines. So
Yeah.
Haines pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
We fell in love with it pretty quick.
And so you bought your property in 94, 98?
When did we buy it? It's on that sheet there somewhere. I know we came here in 88. Martha and I first came here in 1988.
Bought land in 98. Moved to Haines in 2002.
Yeah. So we bought the land, and that was part of that Letnikoff
Subdivision?
University subdivision, yeah. So we bought that. Actually, we didn't, we bought it sight unseen. We had a friend here whose husband, she grew up here, but her husband was a pilot for Penn Air. And we asked her or her brother or somebody to go out and look at it, and they looked at it, took some pictures, and gave us a good word, so we bid on it. Yeah, that was after we were sailing. So
Yeah.
I don't know how.
So let's backtrack. You guys buy a sailboat. This is before Nick and Sasha.
Yeah,
And you
and
guys,
that much to Nick and Sasha's
they're probably ticked.
chagrin. Oh, they were.
They're
Nick
probably
especially.
like, you can't take us again.
Yeah,
Let's
you know,
go.
No, that was a theme for many years.
I could relate to that for them.
Oh,
yeah.
they were like, how come you guys did all this before we were
How
born?
come you did all the cool stuff before
Yeah.
we were?
So we,
Did you explain to them there might be a cause and effect there?
yeah.
There's a
Well,
reason. That
I
you
think
could,
Sasha finally came to realize that, you know, Martha and I have had a lot of adventures, but the most important adventure we had was having Sasha
Having
and Nick.
Sasha, yeah.
And we stopped all of our other adventures to have Sasha and
to
Nick.
concentrate on them.
Yeah, and it was the best adventure we've had. So
Yep.
we're still having it.
Yep.
It keeps going.
Yep.
So anyway, working with Pat Hatch, we were making really good money at Aleutian Marine Services, and so we paid off both of our school, college loans,
Mm-hmm.
we saved enough money to buy a sailboat. And we looked for a while.
How big a sailboat?
10 meters, so
10
it's like
meters.
30, almost 33 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a steel boat. We'd looked at several, made offers on a few. We saw this in Seward. It was a Frenchman who owned it. It was Chatham design, which is like a Bruce Roberts. If you're into sailboats, Bruce Roberts has built countless sailboat designs, and people buy them and then, you know, follow the prints and build their own sailboats, kind of a deal. And Chatham in France was a similar kind of guy. And so this was, and I think that I'm trying to remember his first name. His last name is Breton. Anyway, he Gilles Breton. I don't know whether, I think he did build this sailboat himself. Anyway, he had it for sale in Seward, and we went and looked at it in Seward, and bought it. And then, so yeah, he was living on it at the time, and we bought it, and I think we bought it in late fall, maybe something like that, and then he was supposed to move off of it so that we could take possession of it in the spring, and we also were scheduled. We were running a tender. For Southeast, salmon tender for Southeast, Martha and I were. So we were going to sail the boat somewhere to Southeast and then tender the other, you know, the 150-foot tender. And then we were going to take off from there. Well, we get there and Gilles still living on his boat. So it totally screwed up our schedule. So we were pretty upset. His girlfriend that owned the boatyard there understood why we were upset, and so she, tried to moderate and mitigate the situation. He promised he would be off. Promised he would be off by August or whatever. Anyway, so or end of salmon tendering season. So when we came back to Seward, he did finally get off. He wasn't completely moved off. We still had to move him off. And but then the engine wouldn't run. He couldn't get it to run. We couldn't get it to run. So I said, well, we need to get a new engine. And this wasn't the deal. This engine was supposed to run. So he gave us some money. We negotiated a deal. We got some money for it. But then that put the boat, another season.
Yeah.
So we got the engine in, but we weren't going to leave in the wintertime. We ended up taking it to Seldovia and kept it in Seldovia for the winter. And then the next spring, we outfitted it in Homer, life rafts and radars. And so, I had I think in 1983 or somewhere in there, I had been seining with a guy, Tony Jones, out of Kodiak. And we were seining in Prince William Sound. And I had never fished before, but I was really interested in I was doing the lead lines. We would fish all day until evening closure, and then somebody would run the boat. And I volunteered to run the boat because I wanted to learn. So I learned how to run the boat, read the radar, do the charts, do all that stuff. So I had learned all of that while I was seining, and a lot of that carried over into the sailing in terms of navigation, although, we had to learn celestial navigation, a bunch of stuff like that too. And this is the same time when GPS was just starting to displace Loran. Mm-hmm. The first GPS receivers had 3 receiving channels. They could talk to 3 satellites at a time, and we had a Philips. It could talk to 6. We were top of the line,
high end.
But it was totally GPS was totally new.
Yeah.
There was problems with the crab fishermen. Didn't like it in the beginning because Loran used time signals from fixed land stations, and your box was basically interpreting the time interval from the known time when the radio transmission occurred and the time your receiver received it would tell you the distance. And so you would triangulate that way. It was very precise. Latin long, not necessarily correct, but precision of repeatability was phenomenal to within, a yard. So these guys could find their crab pot strings without any problem. When they went to GPS, they'd be looking for these pots. They're here somewhere, within 300 yards. Well, in the Bering Sea, in 300 yards, and you're in 10-foot seas, it makes it pretty hard to find a pot. Anyway, so that's kind of where we were at with the GPS. We ended up putting all this stuff that I was familiar with that normally wouldn't go on a sailboat, but I wanted the radar and I wanted the navigation stuff because I was familiar with it. So we got all that done in Homer, and then our goal was to start sailing. And so we took a Hyenda, is that what you call it? No, that's not right. We took a break from hiatus, there we go. We took a hiatus from Aleutian Marine Services. They gave us our blessing that we were going to leave and send us pictures, and keep in touch, which worked out well because we stopped multiple times and had to come back and go to work. If we would have had some just mediocre income, like if we would have had a rental and we were getting $200 a month, we could have kept going forever, because when you're sailing, particularly in the tropics, your expenses are very low, but things do break. And, if you're saving your money, you can bank up and then you're able to make those repairs and stuff. Anyway, we didn't have all that, so we would sail for a period of time and then we'd take a break and make some more money. So the first time, we sailed to Southeast and then we sailed all around Southeast. We had taken sailing lessons in Seward. And sailing lessons were great. We did really good. But crossing the Gulf of Alaska with sailing lessons, that was a whole different deal. We ended up crossing the Gulf between 2 gales. And so we didn't have any strong winds, but we had these seas we had to contend with, And we were not really proficient at sailing, and there was a lot of anxiety. And it's funny because as we were coming across, we got to what I know now were the fair weather grounds, and we're crossing the ocean. We're looking for tankers or big ships or stuff like that. And I'm on the night watch, and I start seeing these lights up ahead, and I'm looking at my chart, it can't be land, 50 miles from shore, and there's this 30 lights out there. There's all these boats out there. And it's the trolling fleet. I didn't know anything about trolling at the time. And there's a trolling fleet. I went right through them, And then we ended up into Elfin Cove. And we toured around through Southeast and spent the winter in Petersburg. I worked at the shipyard in Petersburg that winter. And then we sailed. I guess you want to get to the good stuff.
Wherever, however it takes you there. I mean, going from Petersburg to the South Pacific, did you sail the whole way? Did you put it on a barge for part of the way?
No, we sailed the whole way.
Sailed the whole way.
Yeah, so we sailed from Homer to Auckland, New Zealand, a little bit farther.
It's a long ways.
Yeah, but you take it in little bites. It's like climbing a mountain. So, and people would ask us as we were going, "Are you going to sail around the world?"
Maybe.
I don't know. We were kind of, but when we crossed the Gulf, we weren't sure we were going to sail anymore after that. The stress and the anxiety was too much. But as we sailed around and motored around through Southeast, became much more familiar with the whole program, we got more confident. And then when we went to Seattle, Puget Sound, we spent some money. Now, this boat was way more capable than we were. The owner had sailed, I think, 4 or 5 times around the Atlantic and 1.5 times across the Pacific. I mean, the guy was a solo sailor, and he was a sailor. There's no question about it. There's no reason the boat could go anywhere, and it did. I mean, he sailed from. I'm trying to remember the name of the little community or little island. Down by Papua New Guinea. It's not Papua New Guinea, but there's another island group there. And he sailed from there direct to Seward. So, the guy was a sailor. So,
so the boat's capable. It's just whether the captain and crew need to get to the same level as the boat.
Right. So, but when we were in Seattle, we talked to some cruise sail. There's some really good sail companies, obviously, in Seattle. And we talked about some of the problems that we were having, and they made suggestions on how to re-rig the boom had some rot in it, and so we were concerned about it failing at some point. The aluminum was compromised in a couple places. Anyway, and so when we did that, we redid the mainsail and the boom so that we had what they call jiffy reefing, and it basically. We had 3 reef points, and a reef is when you reduce sail. So you have full size sail, and you would lower the sail down and collapse the bottom of the sail, and then stretch it tight to its shape again. That'd be one reef, and then you would have another one. That'd be your second reef, and the third one. So when you set up for jiffy reefing, you basically have all of your lines. You have individual lines for each reef. You don't have to re-rove a line through the end of the clew to pull back on the sail, because you already have a line through there. It's just slack while you're sailing, and then when you start to reef, you use those lines. So we after we got that down, we could reef very quickly, and that was part of our problem. What you don't realize is that on a sail, when the wind, let's say you have 6 square feet of sail, which is isn't very big, 6 square feet of sail, and you've got the wind blowing on it at 15 miles an hour. If you increase that, if the wind increases, what did I say, 15 miles an hour? If the wind increases to 30 miles an hour, it doesn't double the force of the sail. It squares the force. So yeah, the sailing has tremendous amount of energy, and wind changes and square footage of sail area has a tremendous effect on the forces but the boat encounters. And so you really, to sail well, you really need to be able to reef. That's the key, to be able to change sails and reef, and not just reducing sail, but displaying sail as well if you want to keep up speeds. When we got done, we basically, if we were slowed down to 5.5 knots, we set more sail. If we got to 6.5 knots, which was basically our hull speed, we would reduce sail, because we could go faster, but you end up the boat is trying to make a hole in the water because it's going faster than the water can fill in behind it. And so it's kind of like a power boat before it comes up on the step. You got this big hole, and when you're pushing a sailboat past its waterline hull speed, that's what starts to happen, and it becomes unstable. So you reduce sail to try and keep it with your waterline speed. Anyway,
so what was your longest point from point A to point B? How long did it? I mean, were you guys out at sea? 30 days.
Yeah.
Not seeing land. Just
30 days. We left from Well, actually, we left from La Paz.
Okay.
La Paz on the Baja Peninsula, and we sailed to Hiba-Oa in the Marquesas. So
30.
Yeah, 30 days.
Was there a little bit of apprehension before that? Because
there kind of was. So and we
because you guys are both doing this for the first time. I think it's one thing if you have somebody in the group that's I've done this before. It's kind of, it takes it. But when you have two people that you've spent a lot of time on the boat, but this is our first time going this kind of distance.
Yeah, but we sailed from the Straits of Juan de Fuca out of Puget Sound.
Yeah.
We sailed to Newport, Oregon.
Okay.
So, and one of the things, if you're sailing, particularly, the Oregon coast is, it's just gorgeous if you're on the beach. It's horrendous if you're out at sea on a sailboat, because it's just a trap for boats. So there's so many vessels have gone up on the beach there. There's not a lot of safe harbors in the Oregon coast and southern Washington coast. In fact, what's mind-boggling is I think there was, I'm not sure I got the numbers right, but I think there's like 435 charts for Southeast Alaska. And that's way more than the rest of the United States.
Yeah.
There's so much more coastline in Southeast Alaska. And then Oregon and Northern California are those places where there's really not a lot of harbors you're going long stretches. So what you learn is that you're actually safer at sea.
Okay.
So when we sailed, we sailed from Straits of Juan de Fuca to Newport, Oregon, and we were about between 100 and 150 miles offshore. And then again between there and San Francisco. And then from San Francisco, the next landfall was Dana Point. But we went out into the Channel Islands in there as well. So, we already were offshore. I mean, it's like people are afraid of, 20 feet of water. You can drown in 4 feet of water, So once you're off 150 miles from shore, it doesn't matter whether you're out there. You're not going anywhere ahead of the weather forecast, so you're there. So by the time, you were right. There still was this apprehension, but we felt qualified by that time. One of the things that triggered our decision to depart, we were having a wonderful time in the Sea of Cortez. It was just absolutely wonderful. A lot of expats and cheap living, and we were in a beautiful sun. We were really having a good time, but we had to develop the friendship with a Swiss sailor, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to go across someday," I said, and so we talked back and forth every other day. We'd visit, and so we asked him. I said, "Well, how long have you been in the Sea of Cortez?" "Oh, I think 7 years now." So it's 7 years. We're out of here, Martha.
We gotta leave.
We gotta go now.
Before we're here.
Yeah, that's pretty much was it. We realized, it's too easy to get just lulled into staying there. I mean,
Yeah.
the Sea of Cortez is a wonderful place.
Yeah.
So we set sail, and we got involved in a search and rescue for a lost man overboard on the WWII Islands, which are southwest of the tip of Baja, Cabo San Lucas, and that delayed us for a little bit trying to help with that search. And it was pretty sobering and depressing because we were in about 25-mile-per-hour winds, so we had like 5-foot seas, 6-foot seas, somewhere in there. And you're looking for somebody who fell overboard and didn't have a life jacket. So, you're kind of looking for somebody's shoulders and head sticking out of the water. It's not good odds.
That's tough.
Yeah, not good odds. So
No.
that was sobering. But we had talked about a lot of these things. If you're going to go do something like this, you really need to be sober about it. There wasn't anything. Martha could sail the boat by herself, and all of our decisions about our equipment were based upon whether or not Martha physically could do it too. The length of our little inflatable launch, the size of our outboard, all those things, we could have been served better by a little bit bigger inflatable boat, a little bit bigger outboard, which we swamped the boat several times, going to the beach because it just wasn't big enough for surf. But we made those decisions because Martha could operate that by himself. And it's just you just have to be sober about it because people get lost at sea. And we talked about that. We obviously didn't want that to happen, but we knew that was a real possibility. And we lost some friends. We knew about people that had been lost. We knew about somebody who had been lost and then actually got picked up, which was amazing. And then just before we got to New Zealand, there was somebody, we had only met him once, but he ended up didn't make it. He ended up on the beach. So it's a reality, Ocean sailing is a romantic idea. And it is. Some people like ocean sailing for the solitude and being on the ocean. They love the journey. Some people like the destinations. Everybody's a little bit different.
What did you guys take out of it? Was it more the journey, or was it destination, or mix of both, or just just an adventure between the two of you?
It was an adventure, and we had said that if we run into paradise on the way, we may not come back. We may just stay. So we were kind of open to anything. I think for us, in the end, we enjoyed the destinations far more than we enjoyed the traveling. Can be pretty mundane. You know what? Some interesting things. One thing that I have told people from the experience is that it is shocking where you can go in the world with a bathtub, a stick, and a rag. And it's really, that's an exaggeration, but not a whole lot of an exaggeration. It's really amazing. Amazing where you can go. There was guys after World War II that were stranded, Australians that were stranded in South America, and they built a boat and sails and sticks, and they sailed home. They were able to go home. Nobody was coming to get them, so they did it. It is kind of liberating mentally to realize. It's just amazing where you can go if you know how to sail, and you could build a boat. You can go almost anywhere on the planet. It is really a liberating realization. You can talk about it, but to actually realize it, to know it, is a different kind of feeling.
So you go back 500, 1,000 years and more, and the boats that they were taking all over the place, and just the discoveries that they were making, and it is. Water's a great method of transportation, and it's also a scary one. If you know what you're doing and you're careful about it, you can see everything. But one thing goes wrong, or one thing breaks unexpectedly, and can be greatly different outcomes.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying, I can't do it justice, but something about there are no agnostics at sea.
At sea, yeah.
Or something like that. So there are some amazing things that that you see that you. So I'll just one. There were times when we were terrified. We weren't sure we were going to make it through the night.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of times for sure. But then there are other things that you see that are just almost unspeakable in terms of the effect it has on you. And the one I'll share with you is, you've probably seen these satellite images of some low and these spiral clouds,
Mm-hmm.
You see these little strings of clouds in a spiral like a spider web, around this low. And you're looking at this satellite picture. Well, when you're sailing across the ocean, those are lines of clouds, and they're like lines of cumulus clouds. And so Martha and I would alternate. We always had somebody on watch. So we had what we called the night watch, or what do we call it? We call it the evening watch and the night watch. Yeah. So the evening watch would be from 6 to midnight. Let's see, is that right? No, from noon to 6, and then somebody would take it from 6 to midnight, and then somebody would take it from midnight to 6 in the morning. And so I had the midnight to 6 in the morning deal, and it was a full moon. It was perfect sailing conditions, so it was blowing about 15 miles an hour, between 15 and 20 miles an hour. Nice sea, not big, heavy seas, and it was a full moon, just a brilliant, bright full moon. And so we had these lines of cumulus clouds, towering cumulus clouds that were going by, and we were sailing through these lines, right? And so the first couple of times going through here, I hadn't quite figured it out, so I'd have to douse sail because we'd get into the updrafts underneath these cumulus clouds, and it would be too much wind. We'd have to douse sail, and then you'd get out the other side, and you have to put more sail up.
Yeah.
But I eventually learned how to steer the boat so that I would catch the wind as it was not too intense, but heading up into the clouds. And so we were shooting between these clouds, timing it and shooting it between these clouds. So you had the stars and these bright clouds with the moon shining, and we were doing this, so much fun, just scooting along. And then we had phosphorescent. Have you ever seen phosphorescent?
Yes.
So I had no idea that it was you have it in the tropics. I'd seen it in Kodiak fishing.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that was totally cool. So you got this fantastic sky that's got these white puffy moonlit clouds with stars behind it, beautiful moonlight on the waves, and you're scooting along, and you look behind you, and you have this jet stream coming off the back of your boat, like off your rudder, right? Just fantastic. But then I get into a school of jellyfish. Okay, a cloud of jellyfish. So it was so wild.
Is that something that you'd wake Martha up and say, you've got to come up and look at this?
No, I didn't. I should have. But you look down and you've got the jellyfish,
Yeah, you can watch them
and it's
swimming.
Phosphorescent, right?
Oh, my
so
God.
the jellyfish are glowing in the ocean. You got a trail of like a rocket behind you. You got these jellyfish, phosphorescent, glowing in the ocean. You got these moonlit clouds and the stars. It was so magical. It's not anything you can think about ahead of time. So there's moments like that you just cannot. It's just a gift from God. Just amazing. Very, very, yeah. That there alone by itself, that memory, kind of makes it worth it. But we had a lot of fun. We went to the Marquesas and Tumotos, Society Islands, the Cook Islands, Tonga. I mean, that's we could go on for hours and hours. I don't know.
So how long did you guys spend sailing? How many years?
We went 4 years.
4 years.
But it was broken.
It was
up.
broken up coming back, and so
Yeah.
at the end, was it just like, okay, we're time to have kids now, time to go home? Was that kind of the cutoff on that?
Yeah. So I had been afraid to have kids because of my childhood was physically abusive childhood, and it had a real impact on me. I was afraid of being my dad, and it had an effect on my siblings. We all came out of it different. There's that song, I think it's a Police song, "Don't Stand Too Close to Me." You know that song?
Yep.
Well, that song has real meaning to me because, one of us would be in trouble. You did not want to be standing too close to them.
To the person that's in trouble.
Right, because then you were going to get beat too. So it's just, just not a good, and, part of why I wanted to kind of tell my dad's story is that he started the war when he was 15. He went to hell. He went through hell. And that's, some of the reason that he got messed up. It's not really an excuse, but it is a reason. And I've forgiven him for it. But it did have a real harsh effect on us siblings. We're not nearly we're not really close. We talk to each other maybe once a year or something like that. We don't have Martha's family, they're always talking to each other, text. That's not my family. My brother in Dutch Harbor and I are the closest because we work with each other, But our family suffered. The next generation suffered for that. And I was afraid as an adult that I really shouldn't have kids. So it took about 10 years before I felt like I had enough courage to venture into having a family. And
well, I think
that's why we quit sailing, because we just had decided that Martha was, I think, she was at the age where healthy childbearing years were starting to be in decline, and we decided, that's what we were between. We were between Tonga and in New Zealand, and we said, okay, it's time to go have our kids. So,
I think it's the struggle you're talking about. It took a long time for people to recognize the damage war was doing because they come back, and a lot of them were coming back injured, and you can see that physical injury, the mental trauma that's from the things you've seen, the way that being a POW camp, that can't be a pleasant experience. Being on the run at 15, trying to make sure you're not caught, and can't even imagine that. But it took so long for our health professionals to catch on that was happening. But I think it was also commendable for you that you saw that, and you wanted to you were trying to make sure that you weren't. A lot of people just carry that on. Yeah, they're not working on that. They're not recognizing it. And like you and I had talked before about when Cesare and I had talked about generational trauma getting carried on, and it's hard to break that pattern.
Yeah, it is.
But I think the first step is recognizing it.
But even recognizing, I think before this interview, I was thinking back about my dad, and we had broken bones. I mean, serious physical abuse. I think, looking back, I had a short temper. You talked about you having a short temper. I had a short temper, and I would yell and scream and lose it, And I think that sometimes we don't realize, like you were talking about, the effect you have on the people around you when that happens. But I remember, like I said, don't stand too close to me. When my dad was losing it, you wanted to leave, but if you left, you drew attention. You wanted to disappear is what you wanted to do. So when you have a temper, it does affect the people around you. And I know that I had a temper. I still have a temper, but nothing like earlier. And I regret that for my kids, because I'm sure that they got to experience at least some of the anxiety that I did,
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they'll do better than I did. That's what we always hope for.
We always hope the next generation does a little bit better.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can show them enough of the things that
good
we
things.
learned that held us back.
Yeah.
But all you can do is share your story, share your memory, share your lessons, and then part of it's up to them to figure out how they're going to adjust with that or take that forward.
And it's all different.
It's
everyone's different. Every
That's
life
something
is
like we
different.
talked today too, because I can't remember the book that I read recently. I went home and I looked and I couldn't remember which one it was, but they're talking about, because you'd mentioned this earlier today when we had talked about you and your siblings not really having that much in common with how you were raised, and said, and the author is this is like, no two siblings have the same childhood. They're like, well, you're raised by the same parents, but their parents are at different stages in life when each kid is born, and they're going to react differently to them based on the stresses they have at that time, the good things that are going on that time. So no two childhoods are ever the same, even if you got the same house, the same parents, the same. It's all different for all of us.
Yeah. The relationships are different.
Yeah.
And we bring to that our own personality too. So our reaction to things. Before I came to the interview, I reviewed an email that my sister had sent me, or sent Nick. Nick forwarded it back to me so I could review it. And it was interesting to me that she had a lot of the details about my dad's experience, his history, but not a lot about my mom's history. Now, she heard those things too, probably, but I have way more details about my mom's history, stories about, her in the convent, her climbing, different things in her day-to-day life. And it was because I think certainly my sister had a closer relationship with my dad, or a safer relationship with my dad than I did. And I had a safer relationship with my mom. And so it's interesting that she retained a lot of the history that I've lost. I had to look it up, like where was my dad born, things like that. So just same, we're only a year apart, same house, different experiences. So it is interesting. We are all unique. I like to tell people about kids, they're all different, and they don't come with a manual. Every one of them's different, and they don't come with a manual.
Nope.
And I think, that's true for all of us. We're all different, and we react and respond to things differently, and it affects our lives and those around us differently. So, yeah.
Well, I think you and Martha did a great job with Sasha and Nick. My interactions with them, they're both wonderful children, and now adults.
We're biased. We love our kids. We homeschooled our kids, so we spent a lot of time with them, and and then we went commercial. We had a commercial fishing boat for a while, and
so that was gonna be the next thing. You bought. You're in the marine industry. You go sailing for 4 years. You come back to Dutch, right?
Yeah.
After the sailing. So
started a business on my own in Dutch at that point.
Okay.
Because Pat Hatch had before we went sailing, he was starting to. He actually he was an electrical administrator. So, like, we did the cars in Ketchikan, and we did the cars in Juneau. And we did the cars, or Eagle, and I think we might have done the one in Homer, and we did the one in Dutch Harbor, the electrical of it. So his business was taken off more and more towards big shore-based contracting. And when I left, Jerry was the only guy remaining that was doing. We would try to bring guys in, but shoreside electrical does not translate as easily as people would think to marine electrical, because marine electrical is so so broad. I mean, you have you have DC, AC, digital. You have high voltage DC, low voltage DC. You know, it's just everything, and it can all come into a one box. So it's a little bit different. Whereas shore-based electrical, unless you get into a production factory like automotive production or something like that, is far more linear, contained. Anyway, so he was having a hard time getting maritime technicians, and he ended up shutting that down. When I came back, I asked him if he wanted to start it up again, because here I am. He said, no, I want you to start a business, and I'll support you and help you. And so I did. I started Coastal Enterprises there, and pretty much took up right where I had left off. So that's what we did until we decided to leave Dutch. But it got to be too much too. I would leave. I'd get up like at 6 a.m, and I would come home around lunchtime. Maybe I would eat, or maybe I'd eat, somewhere else. But mostly I was coming home to touch base with Martha, give her a list of things that we needed to order, parts, and then I'd be back like at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then we would do invoices and stuff. So that was 7 days a week. That's what it was. It was just way too much. So after a number of years doing that, I mean, we would go on a family hike, and we'd have people cutting across the grass looking for me, to come. And when you personally know people, it's not just a customer that rang you up, hey, I'm kind of interested in knowing if you could help me. No, I mean, when you know the guy, his wife maybe and his kids, and his fishing season is going to crash unless you can fix this for him, it's really hard to say no, and it just got to be too much. So I ended up shutting down the business, and I ended up managing a tugboat company instead, a tugboat company in Delta Western. So that's what I did the last bit while I was in Dutch Harbor, and then we came here.
Because I remember knowing you when you came to Haines, because you'd come into the sport shop and everything, and then when we were looking at putting in food center clothes,
right?
Clinton talked us into putting in the meat market and stuff, and I've got everything laid out. I got Rocky Hickman's doing the construction in the back and everything, good stuff, and I'm calling people in June. I was like, hey, I need somebody to come up, set up this refrigeration stuff. No callbacks. Yeah, no. I'm like, frick, I don't know who we're going to do this with. And I was talking to Stoney Hertz. He's like, why don't you get Mike? I'm like,
Stoney had come and worked for us out in Dutch Harbor.
I was like, Mike who? He's like, Mike Mackowiak. I said, he's a refrigeration guy? He goes, yeah, he's a really good refrigeration guy. I was like, I did not know that. And so I called you, and you're like, yeah, I'll help you out with that. And I remember because you had to go back to Dutch, and for I think it was pretty much 3 days straight, you were over there minimum 20 hours a day.
Yeah, I can't remember what we were doing.
Trying to connect everything before you left, because it was going to be a month or 2 months before you came back, and you're like, I'm going to make sure you're running before I leave. And so you're up in the ceiling. I was trying to be here as much as possible. I knew nothing about how to help you other than maybe hold a pipe up and say,
your attic, your famous attic.
In the crappy attic over there that's absolutely terrible to be in. But just that willingness to, like, hey, I'm going to make sure this is done before you guys leave, or before I leave. That stuck with me for years.
Well, and that's kind of how it was in Dutch Harbor. People really depended on each other. And and if you crapped on somebody, that was it. They wouldn't have anything to do with you after that. And that doesn't mean, you sometimes you have problems, you just can't do it, or that's different. But when you abuse someone, that was the end of the relationship. And in the fishing industry, everybody talks.
Oh, without a doubt.
Everybody talks.
Yeah.
So it is a community. When we were sailing, we were in New Zealand, and we went to look at at a tall ship, thinking maybe we'd be able to go out on a sail in a tall ship, you know. And we went up there, and they weren't taking anybody, but Ian Howden was there, who had been sailing on another boat that we were different boats, but fishing together in Prince William Sound, in '83. Then here he is, all the way across the planet. So it's just interesting how closely we're all connected. So, yeah.
So you buy the Island Girl.
Oh, buy the Island Girl.
In 2006, you're going to go trolling.
Yeah.
And I think if I remember correctly, part of the reason you wanted to do that is you'd loved fishing before, and you thought this would be a great way to pass on a skill set. You could work with the kids. You could be in the summer, do a family adventure.
Well, one of the things that we noted while we were sailing, we didn't have kids, but we when you are ocean sailing, you run into people that are going the same way. They might leave a couple of days ahead of you or a couple of days behind you, and you just keep tabs on each other. You call each other on the radio, see how you're doing, get position fixes and stuff in case somebody has a problem. You might be the closest boat, to go back and help or do whatever. They may be the closest boat to you. And in the course of getting to know all these different sailors, we ran into families that were sailing, and we were just amazed. Here you'd have like a 14-year-old boy or a 14-year-old girl, and they were doing the whole night watch. They were setting sails, navigating, doing the whole thing, running the whole boat. Everybody else is asleep, trusting them and they know how to do it. They can do it. You could give them a boat. They could sail from Australia to New Zealand. No problem. They know how to do it. And yet you would see them with younger siblings or other young kids, and then they would be kids, and they were playing and they were kids again. They could be very responsible, but they were still able to be kids. And that was just kind of magical for us. So we really thought, and of course, Sasha and Nick are saying, well, how come we didn't get to do it,
How come we had to be on the commercial fishing boat working rather than sailing the South Pacific?
But anyway, we saw
how come you didn't do that in the reverse order?
We saw that, and we decided that, we wanted to have a boat and have our kids with us on the boat. And there's a lot of things fishing that besides the practical navigation and maintenance and responsibilities and stuff, there's a lot of things that you learn about yourself in terms of discipline and knowing, finishing a job that you have to you do. Nobody's going to let you off the hook. You got to finish your shift. You got to finish your job. You got to do this. And when everybody's working, everybody's there. You can't go far off. So there are really good life lessons, I think, that came out of that. But we didn't. I bought a 54-foot boat because I wanted to make sure they stuck with me for a while, instead of a 32-foot boat or something like that. I got one I figured was big enough that they would be comfortable on, and so I did make a deal with them, though, and that deal was that we would take one day off a week, which is just troll, isn't it? What? What? Yeah, no, we'd take one day off a week, and every week at least we would take one day off, and we would just go to the beach, and we would do whatever the family wanted to do. We'd go hiking, we go berry picking, we go deer hunting, we do whatever, and we also tried to fish. We tried to see as much of Southeast as we possibly could, and there's a lot to see. But we gave it a good shot. So I think we went to all the hot springs. We've been to all of the cool little coves and stuff and caves that we'd heard about. So it was a fishing venture, but not. I mean, we paid our bills and stuff. We didn't get rich fishing. We weren't hardcore fishermen, but I think we had a really good.
It was a great family adventure.
Yeah, I think it was great. And there were times when I thought, oh, my kids, I'm sure they hate me for taking them fishing. But later on, Sasha in college, she would write an essay about. So when you're trolling, you've got wires that are going down from a rig on the boat down into the water, and the boat's moving through the water, and on a nice what we call it a typical southeast day. It's kind of foggy and maybe drizzly, rainy, but it's not blowing really hard. The boat would be sailing along, and those lines would be singing. Because they're being drugged through the water, and they're under tension, and they make sounds. And Sasha wrote one of the most beautiful essays about just that whole thing, the water dripping, and it was just beautiful. She captured that moment, and there's moments like that. They're kind of magical. I don't know. For me, they're very spiritual times when you're doing something, and there's just so much beauty in everything that seems mundane, but there's like the lines singing and the water dripping. I don't know. She just did a fantastic job of capturing that, and that made me realize that she saw some of the things that I saw, and Nick too. They hated eating salmon because we ate lots of fish. But now, are you bringing some fish down? I think you can have too much of something for a while, but no, they really enjoyed it. So I really enjoyed being with them. It was great. And when they decided that they were done, I was done, because fishing with a hired crew is completely different than fishing with your family, in good ways and bad ways. So
yeah. Well, one of the main reasons you did it was for the family time,
right.
And if you don't have the family time,
right,
move on to the next
Although
adventure.
I really enjoyed it. I sometimes think, I tell Martha, I'm keeping watching these permit prices. Maybe I'll retire.
Trolling.
Yeah, but
she's shaking her head, going, "What the?"
She's not giving up the garden. I'll be all by myself. That was the thing. Martha really loves the garden, and that was the thing she missed. While we were trolling was the garden. She missed the garden. But we had, courtesy of Norm Pillen, we had these giant battery boxes. They were about 3 foot by 2 foot and about probably 2 foot high, black plastic boxes. They were actually battery boxes for locomotive railroads. Railroad locomotives. Locomotives run on 32 volt. And our friend Norm Pillen had a 32 volt system on his tender, and he ordered some batteries, and he ended up with these boxes that they came in. And you want these? Yeah, we took them. So we put those up on our fly bridge with soil in them, and they would.
You had a
absorb
garden
the
at
heat.
sea?
We had salad, fresh salad every night. It was crazy because it was that black plastics just absorbed the heat, and that soil was really good, and so we had fresh salad.
Salad every night.
It was pretty nice.
Yeah.
We'd pull up next to the tender. Wow! When we look at it, whoa!
Can we be your crew?
Yeah, it was pretty nice. So she got to bring her garden with her.
Got a little bit of garden with.
Yeah.
So when was it that you decided to finish the last part of your pilot's license and start flying again?
I was after we sold Island Girl.
Okay.
And the kids were older. One of the reasons I didn't get back into it was because I was concerned as a dad of having an accident and then having a family with young kids and a widow. So, I mean, that's just how my brain works. I think about those things. So I waited until, and there's lots of families that have commercial pilots and they have kids. There's nothing. I don't know if there's anything logical about it, but that's just how I looked at it. I thought I'd wait. So after we got rid of the Island Girl, that's when I decided I wanted to finish my flying stuff. So I had started out in '77 flying little Citabras, and this is back when everything was paper charts. It wasn't GPS, and you were all using VOR radio navigation and stuff. And Alaska's pretty big. Not now with all this satellite navigation stuff. I mean, it's so easy. But in those days, you had a piece of paper and you kept track of where you were. And there are places in Alaska that if you just like somebody, you were asleep for 2 hours and you woke up and the guy next to you wasn't around anymore, you wouldn't know where you were on the map because it just looks the same, And I don't mean it's flat; it could be hilly, but it's one hill after the other hill. Where am I? So you really had to, when you navigated, you were looking at the chart, you were paying attention to the sectional, what was going on, and then the other thing, like if you're going a long distance cross country, you might leave on a VOR, which is a VHF omnidirectional beacon, a radio. You can leave on a radial that is a frequency specific to a compass rose angle. You can leave on that, and then you're headed for, let's say, Ruby, and somewhere across the expanse from Fairbanks to Ruby, you might lose the radio signal altogether. You got nothing. So now you're flying on dead reckoning. You're holding a course. You hopefully have figured out how much wind drift and stuff you got going, and you keep going for a while, and you have your radio tuned, hoping to get the receive signal from Ruby on the VOR for a period of time, and then poof, hey, there it is. It worked. It works great unless you're in the soup, and then navigation in the soup back then was a little bit trickier than it is today. We got so much electronics now; it's amazing. So anyway, I decided I didn't have enough money to finish back then, but I really loved flying, and so I went down and got my pilot's license down in. Sasha had started college then, so we had a connection to Moscow Pullman, and while we were down there visiting with, basically you can get a pilot's license in Alaska. There's nobody in this town that's going to instruct you, so you've got to go somewhere else. And as soon as you go somewhere else, now you are paying for room and board and hotel, and you're also paying for the days. You're paying room and board or hotel or whatever you've got set up for the days you can't fly because the weather's crappy. And the weather in Alaska isn't always good.
What?
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? So the smart money is to go someplace like Arizona, or in my case, where you've got 300 days of flyable weather a year. So every day that you're paying for room and board, you're also making progress on your pilot's program. So that's why we went down there. I went down there, and then I got my pilot's license in 2014, and got to know some of the guys on the field there. When I was growing up, you had Super Cubs where, there were Citabras and Super Cubs. I knew our family, we talked about my mom being a CPA. My mom knew Al Wright of Wright's Flying Service.
Okay.
And they were close friends of the family. And we would trade, like a hunting trip or something like that for doing the taxes or something like that. And so, I knew Al Wright when I was a little kid. And I knew Bob, who ended up taking over Wright's Flying Service, and he's built it up to the company it is now, and then he's since sold it. But I think at that time it was just Al and Bob that were flying, and Al had a little Citabra, and Bob was flying the Helio Courier, and Al was guiding as well. So that was kind of the program. But those are kind of unusual aircraft. A lot of people had 180s or 185s. Citabras. Cubs were not the big, they were around, but they weren't the big rage that they are now. They were good airplanes back then, just like they are now, but they didn't have the, cult following that they have now. Anyway, but I grew up, hearing about 180s and 185s, and so one of these guys at the airport had one. He had actually two 180s. He wanted to sell one, and I there's no way I can afford that plane. Forget it. But he made it work for me, and so I ended up with his 180 Old Yeller. So that was the first plane we had. And we flew that up through Canada. Nick and I and Old Yeller and Keith and drawing a blank here now. I can picture him. He's a friend of mine. Not good with names sometimes. Anyway, they flew the other plane. So we flew up through Canada. We flew all through Alaska and then down to McCarthy and came across the Bagley ice field and down the coast and came back.
Yeah.
It was a great trip. It was really a wonderful trip. So that was kind of the beginning of that plane. And then, let's see, that was 2014. So a little more than a year later, we were flying back from Juneau, and we had what I calculated to be 47 gallons of fuel when we left Juneau, and that's kind of what the fuel gauges showed.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere between Juneau and Eldred Rock, we'd lost all that fuel. And I started seeing problems with the fuel gauges earlier, but it didn't dawn on me that we had a fuel leak somewhere. Fuel was leaking somehow. So I assumed that we had a problem with the fuel gauges because Nick tapped on it and then the fuel gauge moved. So I thought we had an electrical problem. I was checking.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the case. We were losing fuel. We lost, well, what would be about 47 gallons in 30 minutes. So quite a bit of fuel. And we ended up having to ditch the plane.
And it was you and Nick and Martha.
Nick and I, Martha and Victoria Hansen.
Victoria Hansen.
Yeah. Nick and Victoria were just coming back, and Martha were just coming back from doing a college, visitation.
Yeah, visit trip.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I picked them up in Juneau, and we put their bags on the seaplanes.
What time of year was it? This was fall, right?
November.
November, yeah.
Yep. November 4th. Yeah.
So you have to ditch the plane.
I had to ditch the plane. So it was snowing. It was blowing about 25, and I don't know what the temperature was, but I think it was in the 20s.
Yeah.
Maybe the upper 20s. Blowing relatively hard and snowing, and we had a low ceiling, so I wasn't very high. I had just started. We'd gotten past Point Sherman, so I was able to start climbing. We'd been down about 1,000 feet or a little bit lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started able to climb. We got to about 1,500 feet, and we were about halfway from the far side across to Eldred Rock when the engine died. And I tried restarting it, and it would not start. So it sputtered, and that was it. So there's, if you go by the textbook, if you're ditching a plane, you're supposed to land into the wind. And if you have ocean swells, you're supposed to go parallel to the swells, which would be perpendicular to wind, but
Mm-hmm.
the swells are different than wind waves typically. So, but I'm looking straight ahead and I see Eldred Rock, and it's a frothing white shoreline. There's no way we are getting out of the water there.
Yeah.
And there's no way I'm getting to Sullivan Island. It's too far away. So we turn around and go downwind, which is what you're not supposed to do. But we turn around and go downwind, and I'm trying to get as far as I can along the shoreline to get to some place where people could see us. I was in search and rescue for a while, and I know how hard it is to spot things sometimes. And people, when I tell the story here, people wonder, well, how come people couldn't see you? Because we had 3 or 4 planes went by, and we had a boat that was a fishing boat that was about 100 yards off the beach, and nobody saw us. And people, how's that possible? But I remind them, if you're on the ferry and somebody standing next to you sees a deer on the beach, and they're pointing at it, and they're describing where that is, and you still can't see it. Imagine what it's like when you don't have anybody doing that for you. You're looking. And the other thing is that people typically, when they're looking looking ahead and out to the sides. They don't typically look back. Mm-hmm. And so, we had ditched the plane. We had about 150 yards swim in water that was, probably, I don't know, 36, 38 degrees, pretty cold water. Martha didn't make it to the beach. She drowned. And so Nick grabbed me, helped me get to the beach, and then there's three of us, three adults. I mean, Victoria's a young woman, but she's an adult. So there's three of us, and we can barely lift Martha enough in the surf to keep her head from, protect her head. That's how exhausted we were by the time we got to the...
Oh, because you're fully clothed. You got your some winter clothing on, right? Now it's totally saturated from being in the water.
And you've been swimming in 38 degree water for 15, 20 minutes or something like that. Your things aren't working, your muscles aren't working. But I was shocked at how... I mean, I can pick Martha up. I could barely... The three of us could barely hold her upper body up high enough to keep her head from banging on the rocks. So we got her out of the surf, and then we did CPR on her, and she came back. So that was the first miracle. She came back, and she might have been in the water 5 minutes, drowned for 5 minutes or something. It's hard to say. I don't know. It's funny because when they were in the hospital, they asked all these questions, and they were probably trying to determine whether or not there was brain damage or was this worth, pursuing. I never even thought about that because I've been around cold water all of my life, and I'm so familiar with the mammalia diving reflex and cold water drownings that 5 minutes is nothing. They've resuscitated kids that have been under the ice for 45 minutes with no brain damage. So there's weird things that happen. Anyway, but we revived her. She was disoriented, but she was coherent. And so we're soaking wet. I tried to get the survival bag out of the airplane, but it was too much drag. I couldn't swim with it. And Martha thinks that she probably didn't make it because she had her camera. She didn't want to let go of her camera, and it was fouling her up.
Okay.
I had to take my raincoat off because it was slowing me down. So we didn't have any way to start the fire. We had nothing. And I carry in my pocket here now. From now on, I have a waterproof, big lighter deal. Yeah. So if we'd have just had fire, we'd have done so much better.
How long was it from the time you guys from the time you guys hit the water till somebody was picking you off the beach?
I think it was about 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
Something like that. I think that's right.
And is that Coast Guard helicopter coming?
No. So I'm not going to, if I went back and looked at my notes, I probably would be able to get things really accurate. So
doesn't matter. If it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be exactly accurate, Mike.
Yeah. I just, I try to be accurate. So I think it was 40, 45 minutes, something like that. And so you could tell people I did get a Mayday off and told them, we were at the slide for the local fishermen who know where the slide is.
Just north of Sherman.
We were on the north end of the slide. And I was pretty sure that was the slide, but I didn't know that was the slide. Because, when you first get to town here, people talk about, Sunshine and Flower Mountain. They talk about all these things. Then you start to ask them where it's at. Then they kind of button up.
Yeah.
They don't, because these are all places that we know.
Yeah, if you don't know where it's at, we'll tell you about it, but we're not going to tell you where it is.
Right? Yeah, it's kind of a weird phenomenon in this town. Anyway, so I'd known about the slide and I'd heard the slide referenced, and that was probably the slide, but I didn't know that, and I wasn't going to say we're going to make it to the slide if that wasn't the slide, because then everybody would be looking in the wrong place.
Spot. Yeah.
So the only thing I could tell them was that we were on the east shore of the Lynn Canal, and that I was going to try and make it to this beach that I could see up ahead, and that's all. That's all the time we had. So we were only in the air for, what was it, a minute and a half after the engine died.
After the engine.
So there's a lot of things to try and do.
In 90 seconds.
About 90 seconds, yeah. So there's a lot of things you try to do. Besides trying to start the airplane, now you've got 3 other people you're responsible for too, and you've never ditched an airplane before, so you're trying to make the very best decisions you can with an inevitable outcome. It's kind of like you've probably done this before, where you're driving in winter icy conditions and the car starts to slide, and you're going to go into the ditch, or somebody pulls out in front of you, and you're going to hit them, but you try to mitigate where you hit them. You do the best you can with what you have, trying to make the best outcome, and that's kind of the situation I was in. So I told everybody, I didn't tell them we were going to flip. Nick knew we were going to flip, because Nick and I had talked about this, because he was an aspiring pilot as well, and we talk about, what, as a pilot, you're always trying to figure out, if the engine died right now. That was one of the funny things about the guys when we were flying up. They would, this is what you always ask young pilots, okay, if your engine died, where would you land now? So we're talking on the radio, you're looking around, you're trying to, well, where would you go now, And so I got a lot of that flying up, and then we were flying across the Bagley ice field. I said, okay, Keith, if your engine died, where would you land now? Radio silence, crickets, because there is no place to land. Just giant crevasses, and you're 13 miles across, There's just some places in Alaska.
There isn't a place.
Anyway, but Nick and I talked about if we had to ditch, would we crash in the rocks and the trees, or would we ditch the plane in the water? And we had decided already that ditching the plane was probably the safest thing. It would have been better if I would have been closer to shore. But I was afraid I was going to catch a wing and cartwheel or do something, crash up on the rocks. And if I ever have to do it again, Lord willing, I never will. I will definitely try to be closer to shore. Anyway, but you pop the doors loose so the doors don't get stuck in the jam. So they're loose. The wind's holding them closed, and then you have everybody have their hand on their seatbelt. Don't open your seatbelt, but have it so you know where it's at. And everybody got out of the plane.
So what's that like? So you hit and just catch a wave and...
Yeah, so you got waves, and they're moving away from you because you're flying downwind. I mean, you're moving faster than they are, but they are traveling in the same direction. And because I had the bush wheels on there, I actually, I came in as slow as I possibly could. And I think I skipped 3 or 4 times. I think by the time I finally settled into the water, I was probably only doing about 30 miles an hour.
Okay.
So compared to like 70. So, 70 miles an hour hitting a wall of water, you probably blow the windscreen in. So I was really thankful I was able to just keep bouncing. And finally I don't know, I didn't look at the airspeed indicator because I was focused on trying to keep the plane under control as best I could, and then we just flipped over right away. As soon as the front wheels dug in, we flipped over right away and stopped. So everybody was out of the airplane and standing on the wing, which is now down in the water about a foot or so, and I'm upside down, but my foot is caught on something, and I can't. And my head's in the water. I'm trying to get up. And I finally end up having to take my shoe off because I can't. I must have broke a rudder pedal or something. The shoe got caught up, something broke, a cable or something had a hold of my shoe. I couldn't get it loose, so I had to kick my shoe off. So everyone's fine. Nobody's hurt, nobody bruises, nothing. Great ditching, worked great. But now we got to swim.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what got us. It was the environment that got us. And so, Martha drowned. We were able to resuscitate her. And now we're hiding behind these rocks. And the rocks, we're at low tide. So the rocks are chocolate brown, covered with, the sea grass or whatever. And we're hiding behind the rocks because it's blowing 25 or more. It's really cold. And we're soaking wet. And I've got Martha. I'm trying to hold her close to me to try and share my body heat with her as best I can. And we're huddled down behind the rocks. And, Nick and Victoria are trying to look for resources. Can we start a fire? Is there anything we can, anything? They're looking around and they're waving. If somebody comes up, they'll jump up and wave. But, you can't stand out there and look for planes. Oh,
No.
there's one. Let's wait till he gets here. You're freezing. So you're staying down behind the rocks as best you can. And then when you hear a plane, you jump up and you try to attract them. But like I said, when you're looking for somebody, you're kind of looking like this. You're not looking behind you.
Yeah.
And so when we hear them, we'd jump up, but they would be parallel to us or just passing us when we'd hear them, and they wouldn't see us. And, they were down on the deck, less than 500 feet. We knew they were looking for us, but they just never saw us. I was wearing brown. Martha was wearing brown. I can't remember what Nick was wearing. I got high vis.
High vis on all your.
Liz would be proud of me. I got high vis stuff all over the airplane now, But Victoria had a white and blue down or synthetic jacket on, and that is what. So you asked who found us first. The Coast Guard dispatched, but one of the things that I just am so thankful for with Temsco, right from the get-go, they do not wait. If you have a search and rescue, the state of Alaska is the controlling entity. And so they're the on-scene, the ice, what do they call it, ICS? Or they're the ones that control the activity. And so if you're going to participate in a search, you get their authorization to spend money, fuel, pilot expenditure, that kind of stuff. Temsco doesn't wait. They hear a problem, boom, they go.
They're gone.
They're gone.
Yeah.
If they don't get paid, they don't get paid. They go. So, and that's who found us. They took off with that 500 Hughes 500, and it was okay. So here I am, right? Here's the pilot. I got 3 people. I got my wife, who is becoming. When we resuscitated her, we were asking her questions. She was coherent. She was getting mad because we were asking her questions, and she was, what do you guys, you're starting to irritate me. But now she's not being coherent, and she's slowly dying. And I got 2 people around me that are dying, and there is nothing I can do. I have exhausted everything I can do. I've got nothing. Everybody that was in my care is dying. And if it would have been Sasha, I'd have been losing my entire family in one fell. I had nothing left. It was all up to God. It was God's mercy that saved us. That was it. There'd been a lot of planes that have gone down, and
anybody that's lived in Haines for any amount of time, it's less frequent now with the new navigation that you're talking about. But growing up, the number of times that we've lost pilots and passengers,
you go down, and sometimes you never find them.
Nope.
And they never found my plane because it sank. It didn't float very long. It sank pretty quickly. And it flipped upside down, and then the tail was kind of towards the beach, and so as it sank, it just flew out into the deep,
So when Temsco found you, were they able to land there and get you in the chopper, or did they have to wait for the Coast Guard to airlift you off of that?
Those guys came, and they were about 50 feet. And, we just had watched planes go by and a boat go by, yelling and screaming. And you could see the back door on the deck open. I mean, they were 100 yards away, but they weren't looking behind. They came down, and then they turned around, and they went back. They just didn't see us, When that Hughes 500 came over, I think Eric was the pilot, came over, and here's another plane, and they're low, and we just barely heard them in time to jump up. Right? When they banked so hard, you knew they saw you. That really made the difference right there. Anyway, so they came around, and then they landed. The nice thing about that helicopter is it's got a pretty tall mast on it, so they could land inside, and it's small, so they could get down between the rocks. And so, they came, and shortly after they got there, I think the Jayhawk came and they landed farther down the beach where it was a little bit more open. And they wanted to get Sasha and Victoria and Nick, because you typically get the young people because they don't have the body mass, and they're they're usually the ones that suffer most from hypothermia. But I told them, I said, no, she's drowned, and we resuscitated her. So they got her, and I couldn't even walk at that point. So I'm trying to remember the other guy I should have remembered. Anyway, he picked her up and carried her to the helicopter, and then he stayed on the ground. Maybe he did. They went over to the Jayhawk, and the medic from the Jayhawk jumped in the Hughes 500, and they raced off to the hospital. And then they got the Jayhawk over and balanced it, at a spot on one skid, and then they got us into the helicopter, and we flew back over there.
So you, Nick, and Victoria went in the Jayhawk?
Yeah. And then they landed us on the runway by the fire department, and they had an ambulance there. And it was really nice because as soon as the ambulance pulled up, I looked across, and there was one of the EMS guys there had a phone. I said, "Can we borrow your phone?" And he said, "Sure." And I handed it to Victoria, and I said, "Call your mom and dad. Tell them you're okay."
Yeah.
They had not even known
They
yet.
didn't even know.
Yeah. So when she called them, they didn't know. She just said, "Yeah, we were all fine." I mean, And then about 5-10 minutes later, the newspaper was knocking at the door at their house. So that was a blessing.
Yes.
As well. I wouldn't have wanted to have been the parent on the receiving end of that. Anyway, so that worked out well. But when we got to the hospital, Martha, they were doing CPR, and Martha, what had happened was when she came, so she drowned, and we resuscitated her. Then they got her to the ER room, and I think FAA called Matt and asked him to check and see if my plane was here. And he saw the car here, and he knew the plane was gone. So he reported that the plane was missing. The plane's not here. This is not a false alarm. And then he called Rose, who was in charge of the ER at the time.
Yep.
And so Rose knew we were coming, or had an idea that we might be coming. And so she brought people back to the hospital in case we came. Anyway, so they did a process on Martha called lavage, I think is what the term is where they circulate warm, just saline, that's it. Warm saline into your body to resuscitate your core temperature. And my recollection is that they told me that her core temperature was 73 degrees when she showed up. So when she came in, they got her on the gurney, and they started to take her vitals, and she coded. Right? I mean, she got into the ER room, and her heart stopped. Boom. So they were working on her, trying to do CPR and get her going. And so they were gathering microwaves and saline from all around the hospital and bringing it down to the ER room. Normally in a lavage system, it's a recirculating system. Mm-hmm. So they put warm fluid into you. It comes back out. They recover it, and it gets warmed again, and they just circulate it that way. Well, they didn't have anything sophisticated like that. So they were taking saline and warming it, and then it was just pouring out on the floor. And they were going to run out of saline, at some point. But they did CPR in the fire department there. Did CPR, taking turns for 35 minutes, kept her going. Finally, her heart started again. She warmed up enough, then her heart started again. So that's twice, right? So then she's doing better, and they keep looking at me. What do you want to do? I said, whatever we have to do,
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until much later that I realized that they were asking me, should we keep going? Because that never even entered my mind. Of course we should keep going. Sasha. I mean, gosh, I keep saying
Victoria.
because I had this horrifying realization that it could have been Sasha. Not that Victoria is not important to me; she's like a daughter to me too. But Victoria and Nick, they were doing okay. I was checking on them, but I was mostly just staying there watching Martha. And so she started, her core temperature started to come out, but the guys that were bag masking her were having a hard time. Having a hard time getting her to take air and getting harder and harder to squeeze the bag. What was happening was as her organs had gotten so cold that they were starting to inflame. They were watching her CO2 levels. You got to watch CO2 levels because that'll affect the kidney. And those numbers were okay, but she was starting to get inflammation of the organs, and what was pushing up on her diaphragm, and so her organs were expanding and collapsing her lungs, and they were just barely able to get enough air into her. I mean, her oxygen level was like at 80. 79, 78, 80, and they were just trying to keep it there. Medevac finally shows up, and they can't take her because she's not stable. They can't put her on an airplane in those conditions. She's never going to make it, And so they were trying to figure out what was going on, and they realized it was what they call compartmentalization, and they had some fancy instrument that they had not used before, and they were trying to figure out how to use it to actually measure the difference of the pressure to see what was going on, in her abdomen versus her thoracic cavity. And anyway, fortunately there was a internal surgeon there, and she finally walked up to me and she said, "This is what we think's happening. I think what we need to do is open her up and relieve that pressure in her abdomen, and so that's what we think you should do. Let's do it."
Do it.
So they did. So Martha tells this story. She's conscious now. Okay, she's trying to breathe, but she's not getting enough air, so they're bag masking her. She's conscious now. They take her upstairs. I think they take her upstairs. They take her up to the surgery room, and they bring her in. And her vitals are so borderline that they can't anesthetize her because they're afraid if they anesthetize her, her nervous system will just shut down. And so they tranquilize her, meaning that they don't tranquilize her. I'm sorry. They paralyze her. So what they do is there's not a numbing effect. They just keep your muscles from doing anything. So she's awake, and she gets to experience them cutting her open. She can feel everything. She's saying she told me later on, she's trying to yell, "It hurts! I can feel it,"
but she can't.
She can't. Her muscles are totally. I don't remember the exact terminology, but they couldn't make her unconscious because they were afraid that she would crash, and so they just made her paralyzed so she couldn't move. None of her muscles could move, So they cut her open. Anyway, she had an out-of-body experience too, which was, I'm a poo-pooer, but she talked to the doctors afterwards, and she was able to recite things that they were talking about not within hearing range of her.
Really?
So, and she had this idea that she saw herself from above looking down at them working on her, and saw them pulling her intestines out. So they did all the stuff. She couldn't see this stuff because she had the sheet, but they had pulled her intestines out, and they were looking for any damage and stuff, and then put things back together and taped her back up. Yeah. Anyway, as soon as they cut her open, boom, her O2 levels just shot right up. And she was all right. Yeah.
So then they medevaced her to Seattle.
Yeah, medevaced her to Harborview, and I think we were there a total of 2 weeks, maybe a little bit less. But it was really strange because Harborview's, they've got 3 towers. There are two tall ones and I think a shorter one, and it's a learning hospital, so you've got people coming by on a regular basis. But there would be a group of students or a doctor or somebody from another tower that would come up and they would be talking about, this is her.
Really?
People would come over because
Come
she
over.
was recovering so rapidly
Yeah.
that they couldn't believe how fast she was recovering. So people would come by and say, "This is her. Look how fast. Look at her charts and stuff." They were, they were just amazed at her recovery. So she did really well. Praise God. Yeah.
And then you went and bought another plane.
And I went and bought another plane.
Was that hard? Was that a hard decision after going through that?
I don't know. I think intellectually it wasn't hard. It was hard the next time I flew.
Yeah.
I didn't fly that plane. I flew a plane that I had flown a lot, a 172, but
Mm-hmm.
it was a controlled panic. Flying, it just not just being terrified that I'm not doing everything I'm supposed to do. It was really
How long did that last?
about an hour.
And then from then on, you haven't had that.
No, I about an hour, and it was kind of okay. And then towards the end, then I landed, and then I think I went up the next day or a couple of days later, and then I was fine after that. But it is one of those things that there's a lot going on in an airplane. I mean, people fly airplanes all the time, but you're kind of working in 4 dimensions. You got up, down, left, right, but you've got time too. So it's not just turning. You have to turn in a time. I don't know how to. There's lots of things that can go wrong if you're not paying attention. There's mixtures that you have to make adjustments on, and your cow on my plane, you got cows. There's a lot of manual things on my airplane that you do that are taken care of on other airplanes automatically, and so you have to kind of be paying attention. There's lots of ways to screw up in flying an airplane. I'll just say that.
But I've lost numerous friends and numerous people I know in airplane crashes. I've also had you and one other friend that walked away.
Yeah.
He was the other one was in he had some injuries that took him a while to recover, but he's back flying. It's something that he loves, and I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah.
After being
It is hard
that,
for me to
I think
have
for
passengers.
there it is, the passenger
the passenger
aspect
thing
of
is
it.
really hard for me.
Yeah.
That's what's hard for me is the passengers.
Well, I went flying. You took me flying after the crash.
Yeah.
We went and looked for that valley my dad was looking for
Yeah.
with all the goats, and
Yeah.
had a great time.
Yeah. That was fun.
It was a great flight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the passengers. It's the innocent, You get in an airplane and you take off, well, it's like going ocean sailing,
Mm-hmm.
You if you're doing it, you should understand some of the potential risks and hazards and that kind of stuff, and it's an intelligent decision that you've made. You've balanced these things out,
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times passengers are completely unaware, and it's a common thing, to fly, and it's it's a wonderful thing.
I have a love-hate relationship with flying. There are days like that flight with you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely love it.
Mm-hmm.
There's days when it's bumpy and you can't quite see and stuff, and it's just. I've had too many flights between here and Juneau that were just wasn't enjoyable, and it's one of those that part of me is like, well, you look at all the avionics they have now that make it so much safer when you're in the plane, of knowing your terrain and everything. If weather comes in, the ability to fly in Lynn Canal now compared to 30 years ago is
phenomenal.
so phenomenally better.
Yeah.
But yeah, just there's been more than one time when I've been flying either on the way to Juneau or on the way back that I was like, I wish I did not get in this plane.
Yeah. Oh, I can say the same.
Yeah.
I've been in a situation in the 185. I was by myself with a bunch of moose meat, and I was coming back from the Alaska range, and trying to work my way east. And I was up. There was a lot of low clouds, and there was some icing conditions. So I just went up, and I was going to go into Tok. But as I'm getting closer and closer to Tok, I see that the clouds are towering higher and higher, and I'm probably at 10,000 feet, and I can look ahead of me, and I know that they're 15,000 feet or whatever, and it doesn't look like I'm going to find an opening there. So I had to go back to places because I could see places where I could get down, and then circle and drop down below the clouds to get below the clouds, and then I did make it into Tok. But yeah, the icing conditions were horrible. They're not always as predicted. Things don't always.
Weather's never 100% like they predict it to be.
Yeah. We were talking about Dutch Harbor. So in November of 1987, like it was, I think, 2 weeks after I got there, there was a 1987 November storm. They still talk about it. I think they had predicted like 45 mile per hour winds, and it turned out to be 70 plus sustained. And I was listening to, I was in Dutch at the radio, to the sideband, 14 Maydays. 3 boats went down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that's, just because things didn't go the way they were supposed to go,
Yeah.
So, yeah. Alaska's a great place.
Well,
I
think we've said it on this
yeah.
with other interviews that it's an amazingly beautiful place, and there's so many opportunities up here. But if you make a small mistake, the consequences can be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be very unforgiving. You need to be very respectful of the area.
I try to tell young people that come here all excited and enthusiastic, when they first move here, about all that. There's an amazing amount of things that you can do here. And I try to remind them that there's amazing ways to die here too.
There are.
Not to discourage people from going out and adventuring, but you got to use your head. Be cautious.
I think it's respect for the territory, respect for the mountains, the weather, just what you're getting into. Yeah, it can be amazingly fun. There's a ton of adventures to have.
Yeah.
But the ones that have the most respect for Mother Nature are the ones that are going to come back.
Sometimes
it just isn't going to happen.
Joe Vogler, when we were talking about going mining when I was right out of school, we were talking about bears and being careful, and he issued me a rifle and a sidearm while I was mining. And he said, you make sure you always have that rifle. You keep the sidearm you all the time, and make sure you don't get too far away from that rifle. And then he told me a story. He said there was a little old lady, and he rattled off her name, and she was in her late 70s. So this is back in 77. I don't know. And she was doing a color. She was taking notes to do a color book of the wildflowers in Alaska, in the tundra. And she had been out by herself, little bells on her ankles, little old lady, doing paintings or drawings or whatever she was doing for 4 or 5 years. Never had a problem. Young biologist comes in, fishing game. He's getting sent out. He goes through bear training. He's in the field for less than an hour, and he's killed by a bear.
Huh.
You just, I think that we have our time, and when it's our time, it's our time.
Yep.
So, but that doesn't mean you go jumping off of buildings because you don't think it's your time either. So.
That would probably hasten that it is your time, even if you don't think it is.
Right. Yeah. So
what have we missed?
Oh, gosh.
So here's a different question for you. 30, 40 years from now, your grandkids' holiday dinner with Nick and Sasha and their families getting together, and they're talking about Grandpa Mike. What would be the best thing that they could say about Grandpa Mike?
That I loved him. Yep. That was one thing that I did try to make a point of, is making sure that they knew I loved them. I try to, because I didn't hear that a lot growing up, and I wasn't really sure if that was the case. But I think it's important that you tell the people around you that they're important to you, and not just your family, but people that are important. That like we were talking about some of the people you're going to interview. It's a good thing that people know that they are valued and that they are important. That's the whole message of Jesus, is that we really are important to God as individuals. And I think that's the most important thing we can share with each other, that we are valued and that we are important. We mean something. So hopefully that's what they'll remember about me. Maybe you'll be around to ask them. I don't know.
I don't know. That's a ways in the future. I don't know. Hopefully I am.
I don't know if I'll be in 30 years. If I am, boy, they might be pushing me in a chair.
Yeah. Well, I can attest, when you put wheels under somebody, you can move them wherever you want.
Yeah, whether they want or not.
Whether they want to go there or not.
Yeah,
you got wheels under them. You're pretty much in control.
Yeah.
There. Yep. They don't have much to say about it.
Got a little experience
So
with that.
that's good. That's good for you to be wanting them to know how much you love them, because then they'll listen a little bit better.
Well, I told my kids, because I waited a long time. And I wish we would have had kids a little bit earlier, because I could have been in better physical shape to enjoy them. But I told them, I said, it's a good thing to wait until you're ready to have kids. But don't wait so long that they're pushing you in a wheelchair when they're graduating from high school. That's not a good formula.
That doesn't. There's downsides to that as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
I appreciate you sharing everything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff there, and I appreciate our friendship over the years, and you and Martha, great pillars of our community in my mind.
Well,
we've
people. Been here for 20. Let's see, how long is that? 24 years now. I'm starting to feel like I'm a local.
Yeah, I know people who have been here longer than that still struggle with whether they feel like they've been fully accepted.
I think part of it is that there are people who have lived here for so long, multi-generational. This is a community where people come and they stay, if they can. And sometimes financially they can't. But I remember when we were in Dutch Harbor, we were moving to Haines, and I'm trying to remember that he was a teacher that was out there. Ray, big guy. He came here and was a teacher here for a while. I can't remember his last name now. Ray Chapin, yeah. Anyway.
To get a fellow teacher, he knows these things.
Yeah. Ray Chapin. Anyway, and we came back and we were just, we heard that they were looking at a potential job here, and we just rant and rave about Haines. We just loved Haines, and I think he came down for the interview or whatever, and was back in Dutch Harbor, and he said, I don't understand it. The economics just don't make sense. Why would anybody be wanting to move to Haines? And I said, dude, people don't live in Haines for the money. They live in Haines because they love it, and that's really what it is. That you don't live here because you're going to get rich here. No. You live here because you love it here. And they did move here, so.
They did.
Yeah, and I think they loved it.
Yeah.
So it is a good place. It's a great little slice of America. I mean, in its full spectrum.
Full spectrum.
In a little town.
Kind of find it all here.
Kind of find it all here.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's a good town. And this town, like you said in one of your other interviews, you know, it is moving. And we certainly felt it with our plane incident. How people come together in this community when there's a hardship, like you talked about with the slide, and you know, people rally together. People, I think, people fight about what's important to them here, and that's what probably makes the politics as tumultuous as they are. People are passionate about how they feel about things, but I think they're also passionate about each other, and that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing to have in a community. So,
yep.
Beats living by yourself out in the woods. Done that.
Yep.
Anyway, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, Mike.
Okay.